The morning Lydia Ashcroft was thrown into the London streets like garbage, she made a decision that would shatter every rule of polite society. Standing in the freezing rain with nothing but the clothes on her back, watching her stepmother's satisfied smile through the mansion window, Lydia didn't beg. She didn't cry. She turned her back on the only home she'd ever known and walked straight into the arms of the most dangerous man in England, a duke who collected secrets like other men collected debts. But before we get to that moment that changed everything, let me take you back to where it all began. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far Lydia's journey travels. Because what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The first crack in Lydia's world didn't come with thunder or drama. It came with toast. Your father would be ashamed. Lydia's hand froze halfway to her teacup. Across the breakfast table, her stepmother Constance sat like a portrait of elegance, back straight, chin lifted, every blonde curl perfectly arranged despite the early hour. The words had been delivered in that same pleasant tone Constance used for everything, from ordering the servants to slowly destroying Lydia's life. I'm sorry? Lydia set down her cup carefully. 6 years of living with Constance had taught her that sudden movements drew attacks. The way you hold yourself, the way you dress. Constance's pale blue eyes traveled over Lydia with surgical precision. Your father married me thinking I could make something presentable of you. Yet here you sit, 22 years old, looking like a governess at her own breakfast table. Lydia glanced down at her gray morning dress. It was perfectly appropriate. Clean, pressed, modest, exactly what any respectable unmarried woman would wear in her own home. That was the problem, of course. Constance didn't want appropriate. She wanted ammunition. I'll change if it displeases you, Lydia said quietly. It's too late for that. Constance buttered her toast with delicate precision. Lord Pemberton mentioned you again at Lady Crawford's soiree last night, asked why such a plain girl continues to appear at social functions when everyone knows she'll never marry. The words landed like stones in still water, each one sending ripples of humiliation through Lydia's chest. But she'd learned long ago not to let them show on her face. Lord Pemberton is 73 and half deaf, Lydia said. I doubt he mentioned me at all. Don't be clever. Constance's knife scraped against the china with a sound that set Lydia's teeth on edge. It doesn't suit you. Cleverness in a woman is only charming when she's beautiful enough to get away with it. Lydia's stepsisters, Caroline and Beatrice, giggled from their end of the table. They were younger than Lydia by 5 and 7 years respectively. Pretty, vapid creatures who'd learned cruelty at their mother's knee, like other girls learned embroidery. Mother's right, Caroline chirped, her ringlets bouncing as she leaned forward. I heard Mrs. Whitmore tell Lady Spencer that keeping Lydia around was like keeping old furniture. Embarrassing, but too much trouble to dispose of. Beatrice snorted into her tea. Lydia's fingers tightened around her napkin under the table, but her face remained perfectly calm. She'd discovered early that reaction was what they wanted. Constance fed on it, grew stronger from each flinch, each tear, each crack in Lydia's composure. So Lydia had stopped giving it to her. If you'll excuse me, Lydia said, rising smoothly from her chair. I have correspondence to attend to. Sit down. The command cracked through the breakfast room like a whip. Lydia hesitated, caught between the door and her chair, every instinct screaming at her to keep walking. I said, sit down, Lydia. Slowly, Lydia lowered herself back into her seat. Constance was smiling now, that terrible, satisfied smile that meant something bad was coming. We need to discuss your future, Constance said, or rather, your lack of one. I don't understand. Don't you? Constance set down her knife and folded her hands on the table. Your father has been dead for 3 years. In that time, you have consumed resources, occupied space, and provided absolutely nothing of value to this household. No marriage prospects, no social advantages. You contribute nothing. Lydia's throat went dry. This is my father's house. Was your father's house? Constance's voice stayed pleasant, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. It became mine upon his death, as you well know. The estate, the funds, the property, all of it passed to me as his widow. You exist here at my discretion, Lydia, a discretion which is running remarkably thin. The room had gone very quiet. Even Caroline and Beatrice had stopped their giggling, sensing something bigger than their usual morning entertainment. What are you saying? Lydia's voice came out steady, despite the ice spreading through her chest. "I'm saying that it's time for you to make your own way in the world." Constance picked up her tea, sipped delicately. "I've been more than generous, allowing you to remain here as long as I have. But Caroline is 18 now, beginning her first season. She needs space, resources, attention, things that are currently being wasted on you. You're throwing me out. I'm encouraging your independence." Constance's smile didn't waver. Surely a young woman of your capabilities can find some sort of employment, a governess position, perhaps. Though I must warn you, without references, it may prove difficult. "You wouldn't give me references?" It wasn't a question. "How could I? I'd be lying to say you have any particular skills or pleasant disposition." Constance set down her cup. "No, I think it's best if you simply go. Today, in fact. I've had your things packed." The words seemed to come from very far away. Lydia stared at her stepmother, at the satisfied gleam in those pale eyes, and understood with sudden clarity that this had been planned, probably for months. Every small humiliation, every casual cruelty had been leading to this moment. Constance wanted her to break, to beg, to cry and plead for mercy that would never come. "I see," Lydia said quietly. "May I ask what brought about this decision today?" "Must there be a particular reason? I've simply grown tired of supporting dead weight." Constance waved a dismissive hand. "You have until noon to vacate the premises. I suggest you don't waste time arguing." Lydia stood. Her legs felt strange, disconnected from her body, but they held her weight. Caroline and Beatrice watched her with wide eyes, probably disappointed she wasn't sobbing. "Very well," Lydia said. "I'll collect my things." "Already collected." Constance gestured toward the door, where Lydia now noticed a single worn traveling bag sitting in the hallway. Everything she owned in the world reduced to one small bag. "I took the liberty of having the servants handle it. Saved you the trouble." Of course she had. Even this final moment had to be controlled, choreographed for maximum humiliation. Lydia walked to the door, picked up the bag. It was lighter than she'd expected. She turned back to face her stepmother one last time. "Goodbye, Constance." "Oh, Lydia?" Constance's voice stopped her at the threshold. "Do try not to embarrass the family name with wherever you end up. We do still have our reputation to consider." Lydia didn't answer. She walked out of the breakfast room, through the entrance hall where servants suddenly found pressing reasons to be elsewhere, and out the front door of Ashcroft House. The London morning hit her like a slap, cold, gray, spitting rain that immediately began soaking through her shawl. March weather, unpredictable and cruel. Lydia stood on the front steps, bag in hand, and looked out at the street she'd known her entire life. 22 years in that house. 22 years of knowing every creaking floorboard, every window that stuck, every servant's name. Her father had carried her through that door as an infant. She'd learned to walk in those halls, practiced piano in the music room, read in the library until her eyes hurt. And now she was standing outside it with a bag that barely weighed 10 pounds, rain soaking into her hair, with nowhere to go and no one who would take her in. The door slammed behind her. Lydia flinched at the sound, then hated herself for flinching. She turned to look back at the house, her father's house, and saw Constance standing in the drawing room window, watching, waiting to see what Lydia would do. For one terrible moment, Lydia almost went back, almost knocked on that door and begged. The London streets were no place for a woman alone, especially one with no money and no connections. She could end up in a workhouse, or worse. But then she caught sight of her own reflection in a rain-streaked window across the street, shoulders hunched, face pale, looking exactly like what Constance had called her. Dead weight. A burden. Something embarrassing that needed to be disposed of. No. Lydia straightened her spine, lifted her chin. If she was going to be thrown out, she'd walk out like she'd chosen it, like it had been her decision all along. She descended the steps, bag in hand, and started walking down the street. She had no idea where she was going, but she wasn't going to give Constance the satisfaction of seeing her break. The rain fell harder. Lydia's boots splashed through puddles, her skirt growing heavy with water. She'd walked maybe 3 blocks before she had to stop, pressing one hand against a lamppost to catch her breath. What was she doing? Where could she possibly go? Her mother's family had disowned them when her father married beneath his station. Her father's family had never approved of Lydia's mother in the first place. She had no friends. Constance had made sure of that years ago, slowly isolating Lydia from any social connections that might have helped her. She had 53 pounds in the bag, money she'd saved over the years from birthday gifts and the tiny allowance her father had left her. It wouldn't last 2 months in London, even if she found the cheapest lodgings. A carriage splashed past, soaking her from the knees down. The driver didn't even slow. Lydia closed her eyes. The cold was seeping into her bones now, making her shiver. She needed to find shelter, somewhere to think, to plan. A coffee house, maybe, where she could sit and, Miss Ashcroft? Lydia's eyes snapped open. A man stood a few feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in clothing that cost more than everything Lydia owned put together, and he was looking at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Do I know you?" Lydia's voice came out rougher than she'd intended. "We've never been formally introduced." The man stepped closer, tilting an umbrella to shield her from the rain. "Though I've seen you at various social functions. You're Edward Ashcroft's daughter." "I was." The past tense hurt more than she'd expected. "I'm sorry, but you have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Renshaw. Dominic Renshaw." Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. Everyone in London knew that name. The Duke of Thornfield. Wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond reason, and absolutely ruthless when crossed. The kind of man who could destroy careers with a word and ruin reputations with a raised eyebrow. And he was standing in the rain, holding an umbrella over her head, looking at her like she was the most interesting thing he'd seen all week. "Your Grace." Lydia attempted something like a curtsy, hindered by the bag in her hand and her waterlogged skirts. "I apologize for my appearance. I was just being thrown out of your own home, if I'm not mistaken." His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I happened to be passing when I saw you leave Ashcroft House, with a traveling bag, in the rain, at 9 in the morning. Heat flooded Lydia's cheeks. Of course someone had seen. Of course it had to be one of the most influential men in England, witnessing her complete humiliation. "Family matters," she managed. "Nothing that need concern your Grace." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not going to cry, are you?" The question was so unexpected that Lydia almost laughed. "No." "Good. Tears make me uncomfortable." He adjusted the umbrella slightly, keeping the rain off her face. "Where are you going?" "I haven't decided yet." "You have no plan at all." It wasn't a question, but Lydia answered anyway. "No." "No friends who would take you in? No distant relatives who might offer shelter?" "If I did, would I be standing in the rain talking to a stranger?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Lydia immediately regretted them. You didn't snap at Dukes, not if you had any sense. But Renshaw's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked faintly amused. "Fair point," he said, "though I'm not entirely a stranger. As I said, I've seen you at several social events over the past 2 years. You're always very quiet, very careful. You stand near the walls and watch people like you're studying them." Lydia stared at him. She'd thought herself invisible at those functions, just another unremarkable woman in an unremarkable dress, easily overlooked. "I observe," she said carefully. "It's safer than participating." "Safer how?" "Harder to make mistakes when you're not in the game." "But also impossible to win." Renshaw tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, Miss Ashcroft, what would you do if someone offered you a different game entirely?" Warning bells rang in Lydia's head. Men like Dominic Renshaw didn't stop to help women standing in the rain unless they wanted something, and whatever he wanted, it couldn't be anything good. "I'd ask what the game was," Lydia said slowly, "and what the cost of playing would be." "Smart." His smile was brief, sharp. "The game is survival. The cost is trust." "Trust in you?" "Trust in yourself." Renshaw lowered the umbrella slightly, letting a few drops of rain hit Lydia's face. "I'm offering you an alternative to whatever desperate plan you're currently forming. A position in my household, with fair wages and respectable work, but only if you're willing to be more than just another invisible woman watching from the walls." Lydia's grip tightened on her bag. Every instinct she had screamed that this was a trap. Men didn't offer positions to women they found standing in the rain. Not without expectations, not without demands. But what were her other options? Walk until her money ran out? Find some seedy boarding house and hope she wasn't robbed or assaulted? Beg Constance to take her back? What kind of work, she asked. The kind that requires intelligence, discretion, and a talent for observation. Renshaw watched her face carefully. I need someone who can see what others miss. Someone who knows how to be invisible when necessary, but also knows when to be seen. You've spent years perfecting both skills under rather difficult circumstances. I'd like to put them to better use. You want a spy? I want someone who understands that power isn't always loud. He shifted the umbrella again, this time blocking a gust of wind. Yes or no, Miss Ashcroft? I have other appointments this morning. Lydia looked back down the street toward Ashcroft House. She couldn't see it from here, but she could picture Constance still standing at that window, still watching, still waiting to see Lydia fail. She thought about her father, about the way he used to call her his clever girl, about the promise she'd made at his grave to never let Constance break her. Yes, Lydia said, but I want the terms in writing. Renshaw's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. Come on, my carriage is just around the corner and you're soaked through. He started walking, and after a moment's hesitation, Lydia followed. She had no idea what she was getting into. No idea if this was rescue or just a different kind of trap. But at least she was moving forward instead of standing still. The carriage was exactly what she'd expected. Black lacquer and brass fittings, with a driver who barely glanced at her as Renshaw handed her inside. The interior was warm, dry, and smelled faintly of leather and expensive tobacco. Lydia sank onto the velvet seat, suddenly aware of how badly she was shaking. From cold or fear or relief, she couldn't tell. Renshaw climbed in across from her, closing the door and rapping twice on the ceiling. The carriage lurched into motion. There's a blanket behind you, he said, nodding at the seat. You should use it before you catch pneumonia. Lydia pulled the blanket around her shoulders gratefully. It was soft, heavy wool, and the warmth of it made her realize just how cold she'd gotten. Where are we going? She asked. Thornfield House, my London residence. Renshaw leaned back in his seat, studying her with that same intense focus. We'll get you dry, fed, and properly clothed. Then we'll discuss the specifics of your employment. And if I decide I don't like the specifics, then I'll have my driver take you wherever you'd like to go, with enough money to keep you comfortable for 3 months while you find other arrangements. His expression was unreadable. I'm not in the habit of forcing people into situations they don't want, Miss Ashcroft. It tends to make them unreliable. The carriage turned a corner, and Lydia caught a glimpse of the street outside. They were heading toward Mayfair, the most exclusive neighborhood in London. Of course they were. Why me? The question slipped out before she could stop it. You must know dozens of people who could do whatever you need done. Why offer a position to someone you found standing in the rain? Renshaw was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the armrest. 6 months ago, he said finally, I attended a dinner party at Lord Morrison's estate. Dreadfully boring affair, the kind where everyone says nothing in the loudest possible voices. You were there, standing near the window, barely speaking to anyone. Do you remember? Lydia nodded slowly. She remembered. She'd spent most of that evening wishing she could disappear. At one point, Renshaw continued, Lady Morrison's necklace went missing. Diamond and sapphire piece, worth a small fortune. The household was in chaos. Servants being questioned, guests making accusations. It took them 3 hours to find it. It had fallen behind a cushion in the drawing room, Lydia said. Lady Morrison had taken it off to show someone the clasp mechanism and forgot to put it back on. Exactly. Renshaw's eyes gleamed. Except you knew that after 15 minutes. I watched you walk directly to that cushion, glance behind it, and walk away without saying a word. You'd already solved the mystery, but you chose to stay quiet rather than draw attention to yourself. Lydia's chest tightened. She remembered that moment, remembered seeing the glint of diamonds in the lamplight, understanding immediately what had happened and deciding it wasn't worth the scrutiny that would come from speaking up. Why didn't you say anything? Renshaw asked. Because Lady Morrison would have been embarrassed, Lydia said quietly. And embarrassed people look for someone to blame. It seems safer to let them find it on their own. Safer, Renshaw repeated. You said that before. You make decisions based on safety rather than recognition. Most people do the opposite. Most people haven't lived with Constance Ashcroft. The words came out bitter. Lydia regretted them immediately, but Renshaw just nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Your stepmother has a reputation for cruelty," he said, "though she hides it well behind social graces and charitable donations. I imagine living under her roof required certain survival strategies." "It required invisibility." Lydia pulled the blanket tighter. "And the understanding that drawing attention, any attention, usually made things worse. And yet here you are in a carriage with a duke, after accepting a position you know nothing about." Renshaw's smile was thin. "Either you're desperate or you're willing to gamble. Which is it?" "Both," Lydia admitted, "though mostly the first." "At least you're honest." The carriage slowed, and Renshaw glanced out the window. "We're here. Come on. Let's get you inside before you freeze to death and save your stepmother the trouble of destroying you herself." Thornfield House was massive, one of those elegant Georgian townhouses that took up half a block and probably had more rooms than Lydia could count. Servants appeared as soon as the carriage stopped, taking Renshaw's coat and hat with practiced efficiency. Lydia climbed out carefully, very aware of her sodden dress and disheveled hair. She probably looked like something the cat had dragged in. "Mrs. Perry," Renshaw called to a stern-looking woman who'd appeared in the doorway. "This is Miss Ashcroft. She'll be joining the household staff. Have a room prepared for her and find her some dry clothing. She's about Miss Catherine's height, I believe." Mrs. Perry's eyes traveled over Lydia with sharp assessment, missing nothing. "Of course, Your Grace. Miss Ashcroft, if you'll follow me?" Lydia glanced at Renshaw, who nodded. "Go on. Get warm and dry. I'll send for you in an hour." She followed Mrs. Perry up a sweeping staircase, down a hallway that seemed to stretch forever, and finally into a small but comfortable room that overlooked the garden. "There's a wash basin there," Mrs. Perry said, gesturing to a corner of the room. "I'll have hot water sent up and some clothing. His Grace said you're to rest until he calls for you." "Thank you," Lydia managed. Mrs. Perry paused at the door. "Forgive me for being direct, miss, but what exactly is your position in this household supposed to be?" It was a fair question. Lydia wished she had a good answer. "I'm not entirely sure yet," she admitted. "His Grace mentioned something about requiring intelligence and discretion, but he wasn't specific about duties." "I see." Mrs. Perry's expression was unreadable. "Well, welcome to Thornfield House, Miss Ashcroft. I hope you know what you're getting into." She left before Lydia could ask what she meant by that. Alone in the room, Lydia sank onto the bed and let herself shake. Really shake, without having to hide it or control it. The morning felt like something out of a fever dream. The breakfast room, Constance's cold dismissal, the rain, Renshaw appearing like some strange guardian angel with unclear motives. She should run. Should take whatever money he'd give her and disappear into London before she got tangled up in whatever game he was playing. But she was so tired of running, so tired of being careful and invisible and safe. Maybe it was time to take a risk. Maybe it was time to be anything other than the quiet girl who stood by the walls and watched life happen to other people. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A maid appeared with hot water, towels, and an armful of clothing that looked far nicer than anything Lydia had ever owned. "His Grace thought these might fit," the maid said shyly. "They belong to his ward, Miss Catherine, but she's gone to live with her aunt now, so they're just sitting in storage." Lydia took the clothes gratefully. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Mary, miss." "Thank you, Mary." The maid bobbed a curtsy and disappeared. Lydia stripped off her wet dress and washed quickly, then examined the clothing. A day dress in soft gray wool, far better quality than anything she'd owned in years. Undergarments that actually fit properly. Even stockings without holes. She dressed slowly, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she'd been eating breakfast in her father's house. Now she was in Thornfield House, wearing a Duke's ward's clothing, about to enter some kind of employment arrangement she didn't fully understand. The knock came exactly 1 hour later. Mrs. Perry stood in the doorway, expression still stern. "His Grace will see you now," she said. "Follow me." They went back down the stairs, through hallways decorated with paintings that probably cost more than Lydia's entire existence, and finally to a study lined with books from floor to ceiling. Renshaw sat behind a massive desk, reading what looked like correspondence. He glanced up as Lydia entered. "Better," he said, nodding at her appearance. The color suits you. Have a seat, Miss Ashcroft. Lydia sat in the chair across from him, back straight, hands folded. Every instinct from years of surviving Constance kicked in. Stay alert, watch for traps, don't give anything away. You wanted the terms in writing, Renshaw said, pushing a document across the desk. Read it carefully. Ask questions if anything is unclear. Lydia picked up the document and began to read. The position was listed as personal secretary and social observer. The salary made her eyes widen. It was more than most governesses made in a year. Room and board included. References provided after 6 months of satisfactory service. Termination possible by either party with 2 weeks' notice. But it was the duties section that made her pause. You want me to attend social events and report back on conversations and observations? She read aloud. That's spying. That's information gathering, Renshaw corrected. There's a difference. I'm not asking you to rifle through people's personal correspondence or listen at keyholes. I'm asking you to do what you already do naturally. Watch, listen, and notice what others miss. Why? Because knowledge is power, Miss Ashcroft. And in my position, I need to know who's trustworthy and who's plotting behind closed doors. Social events are where alliances form and break, where secrets slip out over champagne and dancing. You have a gift for seeing those moments. I want to put that gift to use. Lydia set down the document. And what do you get out of this besides information? Why not hire a professional investigator? Because professional investigators look like professional investigators. Renshaw leaned back in his chair. You, on the other hand, look like exactly what you are. A quiet, unremarkable woman who people ignore. That's invaluable. Unremarkable. The word stung, even though Lydia had used it about herself 100 times. I didn't say worthless, Renshaw said sharply. I said unremarkable. There's power in being underestimated, Miss Ashcroft. You of all people should know that. He was right, damn him. Lydia had survived this long precisely because people underestimated her. Dismissed her as invisible, harmless, inconsequential. Maybe it was time to stop resenting that and start using it. If I do this, Lydia said slowly, I need guarantees. Real ones, not just promises. Name them. References. Genuine references that would help me find other employment if this doesn't work out. Agreed. Protection. If someone discovers what I'm doing and tries to retaliate, I need to know you'll intervene. Agreed. And honesty. Lydia met his eyes directly. I need to know what I'm walking into, what kind of information you're looking for, and why. I won't be a pawn in games I don't understand. Renshaw was quiet for a long moment, studying her with that intense focus that made Lydia feel like he could see straight through her. Fair enough, he said finally. The truth is that London's social circles are full of people who smile to your face while plotting your destruction behind your back. I need to know who's trustworthy and who's dangerous, who's forming alliances against me, who's spreading rumors, who's planning to make moves that could affect my business interests or political connections. Information keeps me ahead of my enemies. You have enemies? Everyone with power has enemies, Miss Ashcroft. The question is whether you know who they are before they strike. He tapped the desk with one finger. I'm offering you a chance to be more than invisible, to use what you've learned from years of survival to build something better, but only if you're willing to step into the light occasionally instead of hiding in the shadows. Lydia thought about Constance, about standing in the rain with nowhere to go, about 22 years of being careful and quiet and safe, and where it had gotten her. Thrown out like garbage. Maybe Renshaw was using her. Probably he was. But at least he was being honest about it, and at least he was offering her something in return. Money, safety, a purpose beyond just surviving. She picked up the pen he'd laid next to the document. One more condition, she said. If anyone asks, my position is as your secretary. Not a social observer, not an informant, just a secretary helping with correspondence and household management. Worried about your reputation? Worried about being effective? Lydia met his eyes. People talk more freely around secretaries. We're furniture, but if they think I'm something more, they'll be guarded. Renshaw's smile was slow and approving. Now you're thinking like a strategist. Agreed. As far as anyone knows, you're simply my new secretary. Lydia signed her name at the bottom of the document. Her handwriting looked strange, too bold, too definite, like she'd signed away her old life and stepped into something completely different. Maybe she had. Excellent. Renshaw took the document back, signing his own name with a flourish. You start immediately. There's a reception at Lady Thornberry's tomorrow evening. We'll attend together, establish your position publicly, and give you a chance to practice your new role. Tomorrow? Lydia's stomach clenched. That's very soon. The sooner you start, the sooner you stop being Constance Ashcroft's discarded stepdaughter and become someone with actual power. Renshaw stood, extending his hand. Welcome to your new life, Miss Ashcroft. Try not to get yourself killed. Lydia shook his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. His eyes held something that might have been amusement or might have been respect. She couldn't quite tell. I'll do my best, Your Grace. Dominic, he corrected. If we're going to be working together, you might as well use my name, at least when we're alone. Dominic, Lydia repeated. The name felt strange in her mouth, familiar and foreign all at once. He released her hand and rang for Mrs. Perry. Show Miss Ashcroft to her permanent quarters. Make sure she has everything she needs. And have Miss Catherine's full wardrobe brought up. Miss Ashcroft will need appropriate clothing for tomorrow's reception. Mrs. Perry appeared and led Lydia back through the hallways, this time to a much larger room on the third floor. It had a proper bed, a writing desk, a wardrobe, and windows that overlooked the street. This is yours, Mrs. Perry said. His Grace's ward had this room before she left. You're fortunate. Most staff are down in the servants' quarters. I'm staff? Lydia asked. Aren't you? Mrs. Perry's sharp eyes missed nothing. Or are you something else? Lydia thought about her answer carefully. Mrs. Perry was the head of household. If Lydia wanted to survive here, she needed the woman on her side. I'm someone trying to build a different life, Lydia said honestly. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to work for it. Something in Mrs. Perry's expression softened slightly. Fair enough. Welcome to Thornfield House, Miss Ashcroft. Dinner's at 7. Don't be late. She left, and Lydia was alone again in a room that was hers. Actually hers, for the first time in 3 years. She walked to the window and looked out at the London streets below. Somewhere out there, Constance was probably celebrating her victory, telling Caroline and Beatrice how she'd finally rid herself of the burden, maybe even spreading rumors already about how Lydia had run off in disgrace. Let her. Lydia pressed her palm against the cold glass and made herself a promise. She wasn't going to be invisible anymore, wasn't going to be careful and quiet and safe. She was going to learn this new game Dominic was teaching her, was going to become good at it, valuable. And someday, when Constance least expected it, Lydia was going to walk back into her old life and show everyone exactly what they'd thrown away. But for now, she had work to do. The dress arrived at 6 o'clock, delivered by 3 maids who looked at Lydia like she was some kind of exotic animal they'd been assigned to groom. His Grace wants you ready by 7:30, the eldest one said, spreading the gown across Lydia's bed with reverent hands. We're to help you dress and do your hair. Lydia stared at the dress. It was emerald green silk, cut in the latest fashion with a neckline that would show far more of her shoulders than she'd ever displayed in public. Constance had always insisted Lydia wear grays and browns, colors that wouldn't draw attention, that made her fade into the wallpaper. This dress was designed to be noticed. I can manage on my own, Lydia said. Begging your pardon, miss, but you can't. The maid gestured at the complicated fastenings running down the back. Not unless you've got arms like an octopus. Besides, His Grace was very specific about wanting you to look proper. Proper. Right. Because she was going to Lady Thornberry's reception as Dominic's secretary, and secretaries apparently wore silk gowns that cost more than most people earned in a year. Lydia let them dress her, feeling like a doll being positioned for display. They laced her into a corset that made breathing difficult, arranged layers of petticoats, and finally settled the green silk over her shoulders. One maid worked on her hair while another fussed with the hem, and the third kept stepping back to assess the overall effect with critical eyes. There, the eldest maid finally declared. You'll do. Lydia looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress transformed her, made her look elegant instead of plain, striking instead of forgettable. Her dark hair had been arranged in a style that actually suited her face instead of just being pinned back out of the way. She looked like someone who belonged in Dominic's world. The thought terrified her. At 7:30 exactly, a knock sounded at her door. Lydia opened it to find Dominic waiting in the hallway, dressed in evening clothes that made him look even more imposing than usual. His eyes traveled over her appearance with the same assessing gaze he'd used that morning in the rain. "Good," he said simply. "You'll fit in perfectly. Ready?" "No," Lydia admitted, "but I doubt that matters." "Honest again. I appreciate that." He offered his arm. "Come on. The carriage is waiting, and Lady Thornberry gets offended when guests arrive after she's finished her opening remarks." Lydia took his arm, very aware of the warmth of him through the fabric of his coat. They descended the stairs together, and she caught Mrs. Perry watching from a doorway with an expression Lydia couldn't quite read. The carriage ride to Lady Thornberry's took 20 minutes through London's evening traffic. Dominic spent most of it briefing Lydia on who would be attending and what she should watch for. "Lord Pemberton will be there," he said. "The same one your stepmother claimed was gossiping about you. He's actually quite sharp when he wants to be, and he's been making quiet alliances with several members of Parliament who oppose my shipping investments. I need to know what he's planning. You want me to eavesdrop on a lord? I want you to be near enough to overhear if he says anything interesting. There's a difference." Dominic adjusted his cufflinks. "Lady Thornbury will also have her nephew there, Marcus Thornbury. Charming, handsome, completely unreliable. He owes money to half of London and lies about the other half. If he approaches you, be polite, but don't believe a word he says." "Noted." "And then there's your stepmother." Lydia's stomach dropped. "Constance will be there?" "Almost certainly. Lady Thornberry invites everyone who matters, and Constance has been angling for social advancement ever since your father died." Dominic watched Lydia's face. "Will that be a problem?" "I don't know," Lydia said honestly. "I've never had to face her in public before. She controlled where I went, who I spoke to. This morning was the first time I've ever stood up to her. Then tonight will be the second time." His voice was matter of fact. "And this time you'll be standing next to me. That gives you power she doesn't have. Or it makes me a bigger target." "Both," Dominic agreed. "Welcome to the game, Miss Ashcroft." The carriage stopped in front of an imposing townhouse blazing with light. Lydia could hear music and laughter floating through the open windows, the sound of London's elite enjoying themselves while the rest of the city froze in the March cold. Dominic helped her down from the carriage, and Lydia forced herself to breathe. She'd attended dozens of these events before, always trailing behind Constance like an unwanted shadow. This was different. This time she was arriving on the arm of a duke, wearing a dress that cost more than everything she'd owned that morning. This time people would notice her. They entered through doors held open by footmen in pristine livery. The entrance hall was packed with guests, all of them dressed in their finest, all of them performing the elaborate dance of social status and political maneuvering. And every single one of them turned to look when Dominic walked in with Lydia on his arm. The whispers started immediately. Lydia could feel them like insects crawling across her skin, curious, malicious, hungry for scandal. "Who is that with Thornfield? I've never seen her before." "Good heavens, is that Lydia Ashcroft? Can't be. The Ashcroft girl dresses like a governess." Dominic's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, a subtle steadying pressure. "Smile," he murmured, "and walk like you own the room." Lydia lifted her chin and smiled. It felt like baring her teeth. They moved through the crowd, Dominic greeting people with easy confidence, while Lydia tried not to flinch every time someone stared. She'd spent so long being invisible that being seen felt like being flayed alive. "Dominic!" A woman in purple silk swept toward them, jewels glittering at her throat. Lady Thornbury herself, Lydia realized, their hostess. "How wonderful to see you. And who is this lovely creature?" "Lady Thornbury, may I present Miss Lydia Ashcroft. She's recently joined my household as my personal secretary." Lady Thornbury's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her elaborate hairstyle. "Secretary? How modern of you. Miss Ashcroft, welcome. I believe I knew your father. Such a tragedy, his passing." "Thank you, Lady Thornbury." Lydia executed a curtsy that she hoped was acceptable. "Your home is beautiful, isn't it?" Lady Thornbury beamed. "Do make yourselves comfortable. The dancing will begin shortly, and I've had the most marvelous champagne brought up from the cellars." She swept away to greet other guests, and Lydia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That went well," Dominic said quietly. "She didn't question your presence, which means the story of you being my secretary is plausible enough to accept. Now comes the harder part." "What's that?" actually gathering information while pretending you're not. He guided her toward the edges of the ballroom, where small groups clustered in conversation. Stay close for now. Watch how people interact. Notice who's talking to whom, who's avoiding whom. The patterns tell you more than the words. Lydia nodded, trying to absorb everything at once. The room was overwhelming, too bright, too loud, too full of people who'd spent years perfecting the art of saying nothing while implying everything. And then she saw Constance. Her stepmother stood near the windows with Caroline and Beatrice flanking her like matching bookends. All three of them wore expressions of calculated pleasantness, the kind that hid daggers behind silk fans. Constance's eyes found Lydia across the room, and her expression froze. For one long moment, they stared at each other. Lydia in her green silk dress, standing beside the Duke of Thornfield. Constance in her usual champagne-colored gown, surrounded by daughters who'd never had to fight for anything. Constance's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, confusion, and finally cold fury. "She's coming over," Lydia said quietly. Dominic followed her gaze. "Good. Let her. Remember, you're not the same woman she threw out this morning. You have position now, power." "I have a job," Lydia corrected. "That's not the same thing. In this world, it absolutely is." Constance glided across the ballroom with Caroline and Beatrice in tow, her smile fixed and terrible. She stopped in front of Lydia and Dominic, executing a perfect curtsy that somehow managed to look condescending. "Your Grace," she said to Dominic, "what a surprise to see you here, and with such unexpected company." "Mrs. Ashcroft." Dominic's voice was polite but cold. "I wasn't aware you knew my secretary." "Secretary?" Constance's laugh was light and poisonous. "Is that what she told you? Your Grace, I'm afraid you've been deceived. This is my stepdaughter." "I'm aware of who she is," Dominic interrupted smoothly. "Miss Ashcroft came to me with excellent references and demonstrated remarkable capabilities during our initial interview. I was fortunate to secure her services before someone else recognized her value." The lie was delivered with such perfect confidence that Lydia almost believed it herself. Constance's smile faltered. "References?" Constance's eyes narrowed. "From whom?" "I'm not in the habit of discussing my staff's credentials with strangers, Mrs. Ashcroft." Dominic's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "If you'll excuse us, Miss Ashcroft and I have other guests to greet." He started to guide Lydia away, but Constance's voice stopped them. "Lydia." The word was sharp enough to cut. "A moment, in private." "I'm afraid Miss Ashcroft is working this evening," Dominic said. "Perhaps another time." "It's fine." Lydia surprised herself by speaking. She turned to Dominic. "Would you excuse me for a moment, Your Grace? I should speak with my stepmother." Dominic studied her face, then nodded slowly. 5 minutes. I'll be near the refreshment table if you need me." He walked away, leaving Lydia alone with Constance and her stepsisters. Caroline and Beatrice watched with eager eyes, probably hoping for drama they could gossip about later. "What do you think you're doing?" Constance hissed, dropping all pretense of pleasantness. "How did you manage this? Did you throw yourself at him? Offer him something inappropriate?" "I offered him competence," Lydia said quietly. "Something you never thought I possessed." "You manipulative little—" Constance caught herself, glancing around to make sure no one was close enough to hear. "This won't last. Whatever game you're playing, whatever lies you've told, he'll discover the truth soon enough. And then you'll be right back where you started, alone and worthless." The words should have hurt. A day ago, they would have. But standing in her green dress, having just watched Dominic casually dismiss Constance like she was nothing, Lydia felt something shift inside her. "You know what's interesting?" Lydia said. "You spent 6 years telling me I was invisible, unremarkable, too plain and boring to ever matter to anyone. And yet the moment I appear on the arm of one of the most powerful men in London, you're terrified." "I'm not." "You are." Lydia stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Constance could hear. "Because you're realizing that maybe you were wrong. Maybe I wasn't worthless. Maybe I was just waiting for someone who could actually see what I was worth." Constance's face went white, then red. "You ungrateful—" "Mother," Caroline interrupted nervously. "People are watching." Constance took a breath, smoothing her expression back into something resembling civility. "This isn't over, Lydia." "No." Lydia agreed. It's not, but it's different now, and there's nothing you can do about it. She turned and walked away before Constance could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She'd just stood up to Constance, actually stood up to her, in public, without flinching or apologizing or backing down. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Dominic appeared at her elbow as she reached the refreshment table. That looked intense. Are you all right? I don't know, Lydia admitted. Ask me again when my hands stop shaking. He handed her a glass of champagne. Drink this. It helps. Lydia took a sip, the bubbles sharp and strange on her tongue. She'd never had champagne before. Constance had never allowed it. What did she say to you? Dominic asked. That I'm playing a game I can't win. That you'll discover the truth about me and throw me out just like she did. Lydia took another sip. The usual threats. And what did you say? That I'm not the same person she threw out this morning. Lydia looked at him. Was I wrong? No. Dominic's expression was unreadable. Though I should warn you that standing up to powerful people tends to make them more dangerous, not less. I know. Lydia finished the champagne, feeling warmth spread through her chest. But I'm tired of being afraid. Good. Fear makes people predictable. He took her empty glass and set it aside. Now comes the part where you actually work for your salary. Lord Pemberton is standing near the piano with 3 other men. See them? Lydia followed his gaze. Lord Pemberton, the elderly Lord Constance had mentioned that morning, was indeed holding court near an ornate piano, surrounded by men in expensive suits. I see them. I need you to get close enough to hear what they're discussing. Don't be obvious about it. Just drift in that direction, perhaps pretend to admire the piano or the paintings nearby. Can you do that? Lydia's stomach clenched. This was it. The actual spine part of her new position. She could back out now, could tell Dominic she'd changed her mind, could go back to being safe and invisible and… No, she was done with safe. I can do it, she said. Excellent. I'll be watching from across the room. If anything goes wrong, catch my eye and I'll intervene. Lydia nodded and started moving through the crowd, trying to look casual instead of terrified. She'd spent years being invisible at these events. Surely she could do it one more time, just with a different purpose. She drifted toward the piano, stopping to examine a particularly ugly painting of some aristocrat's hunting dogs. Lord Pemberton and his companions were less than 6 feet away, their voices carrying clearly in the relative quiet of this corner. Ridiculous that Thornfield thinks he can control shipping routes through simple intimidation, one of them was saying. The man's influence is vastly overstated. Nevertheless, he's managed to secure several key contracts that should have gone to other investors. That was Pemberton's voice, querulous but sharp. I've been investigating his business practices. There are irregularities. Lydia's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of information Dominic needed. What sort of irregularities? Another man asked. Payment schedules that don't align with standard practice. Meetings with foreign investors that weren't properly documented. Nothing illegal necessarily, but certainly suspicious. Pemberton lowered his voice slightly. I'm planning to bring it before the Commerce Committee next month. If we can cast enough doubt on his methods, we might be able to renegotiate those contracts. Risky, the first man said. Thornfield doesn't take kindly to challenges. Which is precisely why someone needs to challenge him. Pemberton's voice hardened. The man has too much power. It needs to be checked before he becomes completely untouchable. Lydia continued staring at the painting, committing every word to memory. She needed to get this back to Dominic, but she couldn't just run off immediately. That would be too obvious. Admiring the artwork, Lydia turned to find a young man standing beside her, grinning like they were sharing a private joke. He was handsome in an obvious sort of way. Golden hair, blue eyes, the kind of smile that probably charmed half of London. Marcus Thornbury, she realized. The unreliable nephew Dominic had warned her about. It's certainly bold, Lydia said carefully, gesturing at the painting. It's hideous, Marcus said cheerfully. My aunt has terrible taste in art, but excellent taste in champagne. I'm Marcus Thornbury, and you're the mysterious woman who arrived with Thornfield looking like you'd rather be anywhere else. I'm his secretary. Right, and I'm the Archbishop of Canterbury. Marcus leaned closer, his breath carrying the distinct scent of expensive alcohol. Come on, nobody believes that story. What are you really, his mistress? Some lord's daughter he's trying to protect? A spy from France? A secretary, Lydia repeated firmly. Nothing more interesting than that, I'm afraid. Pity. I was hoping for intrigue. Marcus's smile widened. Though I have to say, you're far more attractive than Thornfield's last secretary, old fellow named Greaves, wonderful at organizing correspondence, terrible at being decorative. Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. I should return to his grace. Wait! Marcus caught her arm and Lydia stiffened. His grip was light but insistent. I didn't mean to offend. Let me make it up to you. Dance with me. One dance, and then I'll let you scurry back to Thornfield's side like a good little secretary. I don't dance. Everyone dances. I don't. Lydia pulled her arm free, fighting the urge to step back. Now, if you'll excuse me. You know, there are rumors about you. Marcus's voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. Word travels fast in London. They're saying you were thrown out of your own home this morning. That Constance Ashcroft finally got tired of supporting her dead husband's daughter and sent you packing. Lydia's blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Marcus tilted his head. It's quite the scandal, really. Poor little Lydia Ashcroft cast into the streets. And then, miraculously, the Duke of Thornfield swoops in to rescue her. Very romantic. Also very suspicious. There's nothing suspicious about accepting employment. Employment. Marcus laughed. Right. Well, employed or not, you should know that people are going to talk. They're going to wonder what services you're providing that warranted such immediate generosity. The implication was clear enough to make Lydia's stomach turn. She'd been naive to think people wouldn't make assumptions. Of course they would. A woman thrown out of her home, immediately taken in by a wealthy duke. The scandal practically wrote itself. People can think whatever they like, Lydia said quietly. I know the truth. Do you? Marcus's smile turned sharper. Or are you just hoping that whatever Thornfield's using you for, it'll last long enough to keep you off the streets? Marcus. Both of them turned. Dominic stood 3 feet away, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold enough to freeze water. Your Grace! Marcus's smile didn't waver, but Lydia saw him straighten slightly. I was just getting acquainted with your lovely secretary. So I noticed. Dominic's gaze moved to Lydia. Miss Ashcroft, I need you to take some notes for me. Would you excuse us, Marcus? Of course. Marcus bowed mockingly. Enjoy your evening, Miss Ashcroft. I'm sure we'll speak again soon. He sauntered away, and Lydia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. What did he say to you? Dominic asked quietly. Nothing important. Lydia glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. But I have information for you. Lord Pemberton is planning to bring accusations about your business practices before the Commerce Committee next month. He mentioned irregularities in payment schedules and meetings with foreign investors. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Did he mention specifics? No, but he seemed confident he could cause problems. Lydia paused. Is there truth to what he's saying about irregularities? That's not your concern. It is if I'm working for you. Lydia kept her voice level. You promised me honesty. If I'm going to gather information, I need to know what I'm actually involved in. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. My business practices are entirely legal, he said finally, but that doesn't mean they follow traditional patterns. I've made enemies by being more successful than they think I should be. Pemberton wants to undermine me, not because I've done anything wrong, but because I'm in his way. And the foreign investors? Legitimate business contacts, nothing more. Dominic's gaze held hers. I'm not asking you to help me cover up crimes, Miss Ashcroft. I'm asking you to help me stay ahead of people who want to destroy me for the crime of being better at this game than they are. Lydia wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him. Because if she'd just sold herself to someone as ruthless and corrupt as the people he claimed to be fighting, then she'd made a terrible mistake. All right, she said. I believe you. Do you? I'm choosing to. Lydia met his eyes. Because the alternative is admitting I've made a catastrophic error in judgment, and I'm not ready to face that yet. Dominic's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Honest to a fault. It's going to get you into trouble someday. It already has. Music swelled from the corner of the ballroom where an orchestra had started playing. Couples moved onto the dance floor, spinning in elegant patterns that Lydia had watched dozens of times but never participated in. We should dance, Dominic said abruptly. What? Dance. It'll give us a chance to talk without being overheard, and it'll reinforce the image of you being part of my household. He offered his hand. Unless you genuinely don't know how. I know how, Lydia admitted. My father insisted I learn, even though Constance hated the expense of the lessons. But I've never actually danced at an event like this. Then tonight's full of firsts for you. Dominic's hand remained extended. Come on. It's just walking in circles to music. You can handle that. Lydia took his hand, letting him lead her onto the dance floor. His other hand settled at her waist, warm through the silk of her dress, and they began to move. She'd forgotten how much she'd enjoyed dancing during those lessons years ago. The structure of it, the predictability. With Constance, every conversation was a minefield, but dancing had rules that didn't change, patterns that made sense. You're better at this than you claimed, Dominic said as they turned. I didn't claim to be bad, I just said I'd never done it in public. Lydia focused on the steps, trying not to think about how many people were watching. Why did Marcus Thornberry bother talking to me? I'm nobody. You're standing next to me. That makes you somebody, whether you like it or not. Dominic guided her through a turn. Marcus is a gossip and a drunk, but he's not stupid. He recognized that your presence means something, even if he doesn't know what yet. He said people are talking about me being thrown out this morning and immediately taken in by you. Lydia kept her voice low. They're making assumptions. Let them. Assumptions without proof are just noise. Easy for you to say. You're not the woman being labeled a... She couldn't quite bring herself to say the word. A woman who accepted employment from someone willing to pay her fairly for her skills? Dominic raised an eyebrow. Anyone who makes it into something sordid says more about themselves than about you. That's not how society works, and you know it. No, he agreed, but it's how it should work. And part of changing systems is refusing to play by rules that don't make sense. The music swelled and Dominic spun her faster, making her dress flare out around her ankles. For just a moment, Lydia forgot about Constance and Marcus and all the people watching. She was just dancing, moving through space with someone who actually seemed to see her as more than an inconvenience. The song ended and they stopped in the middle of the floor. Dominic bowed slightly, and Lydia curtsied, and then they were walking off the dance floor together while people whispered behind their fans. That was actually bearable, Lydia admitted. High praise. Dominic's expression remained neutral, but she caught a hint of amusement in his eyes. We should Dominic! They both turned. A man in his 50s, heavy-set with graying hair and an expensive suit, was approaching with the kind of purposeful stride that meant trouble. Lord Mansfield, Dominic said evenly. What an unexpected pleasure. I'm sure it is. Mansfield's gaze traveled over Lydia with obvious distaste. I heard you'd acquired a new secretary. Quite sudden, wasn't it? I hire staff when I need them. Is there something I can help you with? Actually, yes. Mansfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've been hearing disturbing rumors about your shipping contracts. Specifically, the one you secured with the Dutch East India Company last month. The one I'd been negotiating for before you swooped in and stole it. I didn't steal anything, Dominic said coolly. I offered better terms. That's called business. That's called sabotage. Mansfield's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby guests. You knew I'd been working on that contract for months. You deliberately undercut my offer. I offered what the contract was worth. If you couldn't match it, that's hardly my fault. You're making enemies, Thornfield. Mansfield stepped closer, and Lydia felt Dominic's posture shift slightly, becoming more rigid. Powerful enemies who won't forget this. Are you threatening me, Mansfield? I'm warning you. Mansfield's gaze flicked to Lydia again. And I'm warning your little companion as well. Associate with snakes, and eventually you get bitten. Miss Ashcroft's association with me is none of your concern. Everything you do is my concern when it affects my business. Mansfield's smile turned ugly. I'll be watching you both very carefully. And when you make a mistake, and you will make a mistake, I'll be there to capitalize on it. He turned and walked away, leaving Dominic and Lydia standing in the middle of the ballroom with dozens of eyes on them. Well, Lydia said quietly, that was subtle. Mansfield doesn't do subtle. He does loud, public confrontations designed to embarrass people into backing down. Dominic's jaw was tight. Unfortunately for him, I don't embarrass easily. Should I be worried? About Mansfield? No, he's all bluster and no real power. Dominic glanced around the room. But he's right about one thing. I am making enemies, and they're going to come after anyone associated with me. You're trying to scare me off. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you've walked into. Dominic met her eyes. This world isn't kind, Miss Ashcroft. It eats people who show weakness. If you're going to survive in it, you need to be harder than you were this morning. I threw my stepmother's cruelty back in her face and didn't flinch when a drunk lord implied I was selling my body for employment, Lydia said. How much harder do I need to be? Something like approval flashed across Dominic's face. Point taken. Come on. We've been here long enough to establish your presence. Let's leave before someone else decides to make a scene. They collected Lydia's cloak and made their way to the carriage. As they pulled away from Lady Thornbury's townhouse, Lydia looked back and saw Constance watching from an upper window. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Lydia saw something in her stepmother's expression that she'd never seen before. Fear. The carriage ride back to Thornfield House was quiet. Lydia's mind churned with everything that had happened. The whispers, the dancing, Mansfield's threats, Marcus's insinuations. You did well tonight, Dominic said, breaking the silence. The information about Pemberton is valuable. I can prepare a defense before he brings his accusations to committee. What will you do? Ensure that when he makes his move, it falls flat. Politics is about timing, Miss Ashcroft. He who moves first usually loses. Dominic leaned back against the seat. You should rest tomorrow. I have business to attend to, and you'll need your energy. We have another event tomorrow evening. Another one? Lydia's exhaustion must have shown on her face because Dominic smiled slightly. Welcome to the season. There's an event every night for the next 3 months. He paused. Unless you'd rather stay home and avoid the scrutiny? It was a test. Lydia recognized it immediately. He was giving her an out, a chance to retreat back into invisibility before she got in too deep. I'll be ready, she said. Good. The carriage stopped in front of Thornfield House. Same time tomorrow. And Miss Ashcroft? Yes? What you said to your stepmother tonight, about waiting for someone who could see your worth. Dominic's expression was unreadable in the dim light. That took courage. Don't lose it. He helped her down from the carriage and disappeared into the house, leaving Lydia standing in the cold March night, wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into. She went up to her room, let the maids help her out of the green dress, and collapsed onto the bed in her nightgown. Her feet ached from the dancing, her head spun from the champagne, and her entire body felt like it had been through a battle. But she'd survived. She'd faced Constance, gathered intelligence for Dominic, navigated hostile conversations, and danced in public for the first time in her life. She'd been seen. Actually seen by hundreds of people who would remember her face and wonder about her connection to the Duke of Thornfield. There was no going back now, no retreating into shadows. She'd stepped into the light, and whatever came next, she'd have to face it head on. Lydia closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the moment when Constance's expression had shifted from fury to fear. That single moment when her stepmother had realized that Lydia wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming dangerous. She was becoming dangerous. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it kept her awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider before. When morning light finally crept through her window, Lydia gave up on sleep entirely. She dressed in one of the simpler day dresses from the wardrobe, dark blue wool that felt more like armor than clothing, and went downstairs to find breakfast. The dining room was empty except for Mrs. Perry, who was directing 2 maids in setting up the morning service. You're up early, the housekeeper observed. I didn't expect to see you before noon, given how late you returned. Couldn't sleep, Lydia admitted. Is there coffee? Fresh pot just brewed. Help yourself. Mrs. Perry dismissed the maids with a wave. Once they were gone, she turned back to Lydia with sharp eyes. How was your first night as His Grace's secretary? The question carried weight that had nothing to do with employment. Complicated, Lydia said carefully, pouring herself coffee that smelled like salvation. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. Few people are. That's why the position was vacant for so long. Mrs. Perry sat down across from her, which surprised Lydia. Housekeepers didn't usually take tea with staff. His Grace is a difficult man to work for. Brilliant, but demanding. He expects people to keep up with him, and most can't. What happened to the last secretary, the one Marcus Thornbury mentioned, Greaves? Retired last year, went to live with his daughter in Bath. Mrs. Perry's expression softened slightly. He served His Grace for 20 years. Never once complained, never once failed to deliver what was asked of him. You have rather large shoes to fill, Miss Ashcroft. 20 years. Lydia had signed on for 6 months, and she was already questioning whether she'd last 6 weeks. I'm aware, she said quietly. Good. Self-awareness will serve you better than confidence in this household. Mrs. Perry stood, smoothing her skirts. His Grace left early this morning for meetings in the city. He said you're to rest today, but that there's a ball tonight at the Ashford estate. He'll expect you ready by 8. Lydia's coffee turned bitter in her mouth. The Ashford estate? As in Lord and Lady Ashford, yes. No relation to you, despite the similar name. Mrs. Perry paused at the door. Though I imagine your stepmother will be there. She attends every major event during the season. Of course she would. Lydia set down her coffee, suddenly queasy. Is there something wrong, miss? Mrs. Perry's voice held unexpected gentleness. Just preparing myself for another round of public scrutiny, Lydia said. Last night was intense. It'll get worse before it gets better. Society thrives on fresh scandal, and you're the newest mystery they have to unravel. Mrs. Perry's expression turned calculating. But you held your own last night. I heard about your encounter with Mrs. Ashcroft. The staff at Lady Thornbury's are terrible gossips, and word travels fast. Heat crept up Lydia's neck. What exactly did they say? That you looked her in the eye and didn't back down. That's rare, Miss Ashcroft. Most people in this city spend their lives bowing to those with more power. You refused. Mrs. Perry smiled, a brief flash of approval. His Grace chose well, I think. She left before Lydia could respond, leaving her alone with cold coffee and a strange warmth in her chest that felt dangerously close to pride. The day passed in a blur of preparation. More maids appeared to fuss over her appearance, this time bringing a dress in deep burgundy that made Lydia's skin look less pale and her eyes less dull. They worked on her hair for what felt like hours, creating elaborate curls that would probably fall out the moment she stepped outside. At 7:30, there was a knock at her door. Come in, Lydia called, expecting Mrs. Perry or one of the maids. Instead, Dominic entered, dressed in evening clothes that made him look like he'd stepped out of a painting. He assessed her appearance with the same critical eye he'd used the night before. Better, he said. The color suits you. Thank you, I think. Lydia stood, smoothing her skirts nervously. Mrs. Perry said we're attending the Ashford ball tonight. We are. Dominic pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. But first, you need these. He opened the box to reveal a set of jewelry, earrings and a necklace, garnets set in gold that would match her dress perfectly. Lydia stared at them. I can't accept those. They're not a gift. They're part of your uniform. Dominic's tone was matter-of-fact. You're representing my household. You need to look the part. Besides, they belong to my mother. She's been dead for 15 years, and they've been sitting in a vault collecting dust. Better they get used. Your mother's jewelry is mine to do with as I please. Put them on. Lydia took the box with shaking hands. The earrings were surprisingly light, the necklace heavier. She fastened them carefully, very aware that she was wearing pieces of someone's history around her throat. There. Dominic stepped back, examining the effect. Now you look like you belong. I don't, though. The words slipped out before Lydia could stop them. I'm playing dress-up in borrowed clothes and dead women's jewelry, pretending to be something I'm not. What are you, then? Dominic's gaze pinned her. If not my secretary, if not someone who belongs in these circles, what are you? Lydia thought about it. 24 hours ago, she would have said she was nobody. Edward Ashcroft's forgotten daughter, Constance's burden, a woman without prospects or future. But she'd stood in a ballroom and faced her stepmother without flinching. She'd danced with a duke and gathered intelligence and survived public scrutiny without breaking. I'm still figuring that out, she said honestly. Good answer. Dominic offered his arm. Come on. The carriage is waiting, and we have a performance to give. The Ashford estate was even grander than Lady Thornbury's, a sprawling mansion that had been in the family for generations. with grounds that could probably fit Lydia's childhood home 3 times over. Carriages lined the drive, depositing guests in their finest clothes, all of them eager to see and be seen. "Tonight will be worse than last night," Dominic warned as they approached the entrance. "The Ashford Ball is the event of the season. Everyone who matters will be here, which means everyone who wants to tear you down will also be here." "Encouraging," Lydia muttered. "I'm being realistic. You need to be prepared." Dominic's hand covered hers on his arm. "Stay close to me. Don't let anyone draw you into private conversations. And if Constance approaches you again, don't engage. Just walk away." "Because that worked so well last time? Last time you were still learning the rules. Tonight, you follow them." They entered through massive doors into a ballroom that took Lydia's breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings, reflecting light off polished marble floors. An orchestra played from a raised platform, and hundreds of guests swirled through the space like colorful fish in an aquarium. And every single one of them stopped to stare when Dominic walked in with Lydia on his arm. The whispers started immediately, louder than the night before. Lydia caught fragments as they passed, thrown out by her own family. "Only been a day and he's already parading her around. Wonder what she's really doing for him." Dominic's jaw tightened, but he kept walking, guiding Lydia through the crowd with practiced ease. They made their way to the refreshment table, where he handed her a glass of something that smelled like citrus and alcohol. "Drink," he ordered quietly. "You look like you're about to be sick." "I feel like I'm about to be sick." Lydia took a sip. The drink was sweet and strong, burning down her throat. "They all think I'm your mistress." "Let them think what they want. The truth is boring compared to what they're imagining." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one being labeled a Lydia Ashcroft?" They both turned. A woman in her 40s, elegant and sharp-eyed, was approaching with the kind of smile that meant trouble. Lady Pemberton, Lydia realized with a sinking feeling. Lord Pemberton's wife. "Lady Pemberton," Dominic said smoothly, "how lovely to see you." "And you, Your Grace." Lady Pemberton's gaze locked on Lydia like a hawk spotting prey. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Eleanor Pemberton, and you're the mysterious woman everyone's talking about." "Miss Ashcroft is my secretary," Dominic said before Lydia could respond. "So I've heard." Lady Pemberton's smile didn't waver. "How modern, though I must admit, I'm surprised to see you here, Miss Ashcroft. I heard you'd had a rather unfortunate falling out with your family." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to embarrass and provoke. "Family disagreements happen," Lydia said carefully. "I'm fortunate to have found new employment so quickly." "Indeed, very fortunate." Lady Pemberton's eyes glittered. "And very convenient for His Grace to acquire a secretary just as my husband was beginning to question his business practices. One might almost think the timing was deliberate." Dominic's hand tightened on Lydia's arm in warning. "Your husband's concerns have nothing to do with my staffing decisions, Lady Pemberton." "Of course not. I'm sure it's all perfectly innocent." Lady Pemberton's smile turned sharp. "Though I do hope Miss Ashcroft understands the risks of working for someone with so many enemies. It would be a shame if she found herself caught in crossfire, not of her making." "Is that a threat?" Lydia asked quietly. "A warning, dear." Lady Pemberton leaned closer. "From one woman to another. Men like the Duke of Thornfield use people and discard them when they're no longer useful. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're special. You're a tool, nothing more." She swept away before either of them could respond, leaving Lydia's hands shaking around her glass. "Don't listen to her," Dominic said quietly. "She's trying to undermine you, make you doubt yourself." "Is she wrong, though?" Lydia set down her glass before she dropped it. "Am I just a tool you're using?" "Yes." Dominic's honesty was brutal. "But that doesn't mean you're not also valuable. Tools that work well are treasured, Miss Ashcroft. Ones that break are replaced." "That's not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be honest." Dominic's expression was unreadable. "You wanted truth? There it is. I'm using you because you're useful, but I'm also paying you fairly, protecting you from your stepmother, and giving you opportunities you'd never have otherwise. That's more than most people in this room would offer." Before Lydia could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. The music faltered, conversations died, and hundreds of heads turned to see what was happening. Constance had arrived. She swept into the ballroom like a queen, with Caroline and Beatrice trailing behind her in matching pink gowns that made them look like elaborate cakes. But it wasn't Constance that made Lydia's blood run cold. It was the man on her arm, Lord Mansfield. The same man who'd confronted Dominic at Lady Thornbury's reception. The one who'd threatened to watch them both carefully and capitalize on any mistakes. And he was escorting Constance like they were old friends. "That's unexpected," Dominic murmured. "What is she doing?" Lydia watched her stepmother laugh at something Mansfield said, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "She barely knows him. She knows him well enough to make an alliance." Dominic's voice was grim. "This is deliberate. She's aligning herself with my enemies to come after you." "After me?" Lydia's voice cracked. "I'm nobody. Why would she bother?" "Because you humiliated her. You stood up to her in public, then showed up on my arm looking like you belonged there. That's unforgivable in Constance's world." Dominic's jaw tightened. "And now she's found someone with enough power to actually hurt you." Constance's eyes found Lydia across the ballroom. She smiled, slow and satisfied, and whispered something to Mansfield that made him laugh. Then they started walking directly toward Lydia and Dominic. "Don't engage," Dominic said quietly. "Let me handle this." "Like you handled him last night?" Lydia's heart was racing. "That worked brilliantly." "Last night was different. Tonight—" "Thornfield," Mansfield's voice boomed across the space between them. "And your lovely secretary. How convenient. I was just telling Mrs. Ashcroft about our fascinating conversation at Lady Thornbury's." "I'm sure you were," Dominic said coolly. "Mrs. Ashcroft has been sharing the most interesting stories about her stepdaughter." Mansfield's smile was all teeth. "Apparently, Miss Ashcroft has quite a history of causing trouble in her previous household. Disobedience, disrespect, generally making herself unwelcome." "That's not true," Lydia said before she could stop herself. "Isn't it?" Constance's voice was honey-sweet poison. "Lydia, dear, you know how difficult you were. How many times did I try to help you, only to have you reject every kindness? How many opportunities did you squander through your own stubborn pride?" "You threw me out," Lydia said, her voice shaking. "You packed my things and had me removed from my own home." "I encouraged you to find independence," Constance corrected smoothly. "Something you clearly needed, given your inability to function in polite society. Though I see you've found a benefactor, willing to overlook your many flaws." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Around them, other guests had stopped pretending not to listen. They were watching openly now, eager for scandal. "Miss Ashcroft's employment is based solely on her capabilities," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the whispers. "I suggest you retract that insinuation, Mrs. Ashcroft." "I'm not insinuating anything, Your Grace. I'm simply concerned for my stepdaughter's welfare." Constance's smile was terrible. "After all, she has no experience with men of your stature. I'd hate to see her taken advantage of." "Mother's right," Caroline chimed in, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Lydia's always been so naive. She doesn't understand how things really work." "Someone should protect her," Beatrice added, her eyes wide with fake concern. "Before she does something truly shameful." Lydia felt heat flood her face. They were doing this deliberately, publicly painting her as either an innocent being corrupted or a desperate woman selling herself for security. Either way, her reputation would be destroyed. "That's enough," Dominic said sharply. "Is it?" Mansfield stepped forward, his bulk imposing. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you've taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman in difficult circumstances. Offered her employment in exchange for services that have nothing to do with secretarial work." "You're making accusations without evidence." Dominic's voice was ice. "Am I?" "Then perhaps Miss Ashcroft would like to explain exactly what her duties entail." Mansfield's gaze moved to Lydia. "What exactly do you do for the Duke of Thornfield that warranted such immediate employment and generous compensation?" Every eye in the ballroom was on her. Lydia could feel the weight of their judgment, their speculation, their eagerness to see her crumble. This was the moment. The test. She could back down, could stammer and retreat, and let them define her however they wanted. Or she could fight back. "I manage His Grace's correspondence," Lydia said clearly, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "I organize his schedule, handle sensitive documents, and occasionally accompany him to social events to take notes on business conversations. It's demanding work that requires intelligence, discretion, and attention to detail. All qualities His Grace apparently found lacking in other candidates. Convenient, Mansfield sneered. And these notes you take, what exactly are you noting? Lydia's mind raced. This was dangerous territory. If she admitted to gathering information, she'd confirm their suspicions. If she denied it, she'd sound like she was hiding something. Social dynamics, she said carefully. Who's allied with whom, which families are on the rise, which are falling. The same information everyone in this room is constantly collecting, just more systematically. You mean spying, Constance said flatly. I mean observing. There's a difference. Is there? Mansfield stepped closer, and Lydia fought the urge to retreat. Because it sounds to me like Thornfield has hired you to gather intelligence on his enemies, to infiltrate social circles and report back on private conversations. That's espionage, Miss Ashcroft. And it's exactly the kind of underhanded tactic I'd expect from him. You're reaching, Mansfield, Dominic said coldly, and you're boring everyone with baseless accusations. Am I? Mansfield's smile widened. Then you won't mind if I share some interesting information I've recently acquired. About your shipping contracts, specifically the payments you've been making to certain foreign investors under the table. The ballroom went silent. Lydia felt Dominic stiffen beside her. I have no idea what you're talking about, Dominic said, but there was something in his voice, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. Don't you? Mansfield pulled a folded document from his jacket. Because I have receipts here that tell a different story. Payments made through third-party accounts to investors in Amsterdam and Hamburg. Payments that don't appear in any of your official business records. Care to explain that? Lydia's stomach dropped. This wasn't just social warfare anymore. Mansfield was accusing Dominic of actual financial crimes in front of hundreds of witnesses. Those payments are perfectly legal, Dominic said. They're documented in my private records, which you had no right to access. I didn't access anything. This information was brought to me by a concerned party who felt the public had a right to know about your questionable business practices. Mansfield waved the document. And now I'm bringing it to the Commerce Committee. Let them decide if your methods are legal or not. You're bluffing. Dominic's voice was deadly quiet. You don't have access to my private records. Don't I? Mansfield's gaze shifted to someone in the crowd, and Lydia followed his look. Marcus Thornberry stood near the windows, his usual charming smile replaced with something harder, colder. Understanding crashed over Lydia like cold water. Marcus was Dominic's nephew. He would have access to family business records. And he'd been at Lady Thornberry's reception, watching, listening, probably gathering information while pretending to be nothing more than a harmless drunk. Dominic saw it too. His expression went completely blank, which was somehow more terrifying than anger. Marcus, he said quietly, you want to explain yourself? Marcus shrugged, not quite meeting his uncle's eyes. Nothing personal, uncle. Just business. Mansfield made me a better offer than you did. You sold out your own family? You cut off my allowance last month, said I needed to learn fiscal responsibility. Marcus's smile turned bitter. Well, I learned. Turns out information sells for quite a lot when you know where to take it. The ballroom erupted in whispers. This was better than any play, any scandal they'd witnessed all season. The Duke of Thornfield, betrayed by his own nephew, his questionable business practices exposed, and all of it playing out in front of London's entire elite. Lydia watched Dominic's face, waiting for him to explode, to lash out, to do something dramatic that would make everything worse. Instead, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that cut through the whispers like a knife. Everyone stopped talking, shocked into silence by the unexpected reaction. Well played, Mansfield, Dominic said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. You found my weakest link and exploited it. I'd applaud if it wasn't so predictable. Predictable? Mansfield's confidence wavered slightly. You think you're the first person to try to destroy me using information stolen by a disgruntled relative? This is the third time in 5 years. Dominic's smile was cold. The problem with buying information from fools is that fools rarely understand what they're selling. I understand perfectly, Marcus started. Do you? Dominic turned to his nephew. Did you actually read those documents you stole, or did you just hand them over for whatever pittance Mansfield offered? Marcus's face flushed. I read enough to know they implicate you in financial fraud. Then you're even stupider than I thought. Dominic pulled his own document from his jacket. Those payments you're so excited about? They're advance investments in a new shipping route through the Mediterranean, perfectly legal, fully documented, and approved by the Board of Trade last November. The only reason they're not in my public records is because the route doesn't launch until next month, and I didn't want competitors knowing about it. He unfolded the document, showing it to the crowd. Lydia couldn't read it from where she stood, but she saw several people lean forward, recognition crossing their faces. That's impossible, Mansfield said, but he sounded less certain now. It's in the public record. Anyone can verify it. Dominic's smile widened. You might have, if you'd bothered to actually investigate instead of trusting the word of a drunk with gambling debts. The crowd's attention shifted to Marcus, who'd gone pale. You used me, Marcus said, his voice shaking. You set this up. You knew I'd steal those documents. I knew you were desperate and stupid. The rest you did yourself. Dominic turned back to Mansfield. As for your accusations, feel free to bring them to the Commerce Committee. They'll laugh you out of the room. And while you're explaining how you based your entire case on stolen documents provided by my alcoholic nephew, I'll be filing complaints about your attempted defamation and industrial espionage. Mansfield's face turned purple. You can't. I can. And I will. Dominic's voice dropped to something dangerous. You tried to destroy me in public, Mansfield. Fair enough. But you failed. And now everyone here knows it. How do you think that's going to affect your own business prospects? The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Lydia watched Mansfield's expression cycle through rage, humiliation, and finally fear as he realized what Dominic had done. He turned the entire attack back on its originators, made them look foolish and desperate, and he'd done it without raising his voice or losing his composure. It was masterful and terrifying. This isn't over, Mansfield ground out. Yes, Dominic said quietly. It is. Now get out of my sight before I decide to press charges. Mansfield turned and stormed out of the ballroom, his exit far less dignified than his entrance. Marcus hesitated, looking between his uncle and the crowd, then fled after Mansfield like a whipped dog, which left Constance standing alone, her daughters flanking her, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Satisfied? Dominic asked her. Constance's eyes blazed. You think you've won. I know I have. You allied yourself with a fool and got exactly what you deserved. Dominic's gaze moved to Lydia. Your stepdaughter, on the other hand, allied herself with someone competent. Notice the difference? This isn't about competence, Constance started. Isn't it? Dominic cut her off. You threw Lydia away because you thought she was worthless. I recognized her value and put it to use. You made an enemy. I made an ally. And now everyone in this room knows which of us made the better choice. He turned his back on Constance, the ultimate dismissal, and offered Lydia his arm. Shall we? He said quietly. Lydia took his arm, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. They moved through the crowd, which parted for them like water, and she caught fragments of whispers as they passed. Brilliant. Completely destroyed them. Never seen anything like it. They made it to a quiet alcove before Lydia's composure finally cracked. You knew, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You knew Marcus would steal those documents. You knew Mansfield would use them. You set up the entire thing. I suspected Marcus might try something stupid. He's been drinking and gambling more than usual, and Mansfield's been sniffing around my business for months. It wasn't hard to predict. Dominic leaned against the wall, looking tired for the first time since Lydia had met him. I left those documents where Marcus could find them, made sure they looked incriminating enough to be interesting, and waited to see if he'd take the bait. And if he hadn't, then nothing would have happened. But he did, which means I now have grounds to cut him off completely and file complaints against Mansfield that'll tie him up in legal proceedings for months. Dominic's smile was grim. I told you, Miss Ashcroft, in this world, information is power, and knowing what your enemies will do before they do it is the most powerful information of all. Lydia stared at him, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. The careful manipulation, the strategic thinking, the absolute ruthlessness of baiting his own nephew into betrayal just to destroy a business rival. You're terrifying, she said finally. Yes, Dominic didn't deny it, but I'm also effective. And right now, after what just happened, no one in London will question your employment or your reputation. They saw you standing beside me while I demolished my enemies. That makes you untouchable by association." He was right. Lydia could feel it already, the shift in how people were looking at her. Not with speculation or suspicion anymore. With respect. Maybe even fear. She'd become dangerous. Not through her own power, but through proximity to someone who had it. The question was whether she could live with what that meant. Before she could answer, Constance appeared in the entrance to the alcove. She'd ditched Caroline and Beatrice somewhere, and now stood alone, her carefully constructed mask finally cracked. "You," she said to Lydia, her voice shaking with rage. "You did this." "I didn't do anything," Lydia said quietly. "You turned him against me, against all of us." Constance took a step forward. "Everything I worked for, everything I built, you're destroying it." "No," Lydia said. "You're destroying it yourself, by being cruel, by making enemies, by thinking you could humiliate people without consequences. I took you in when your father died, fed you, clothed you, gave you a home. You tortured me for 6 years and then threw me out into the street," Lydia interrupted. "Don't pretend this was kindness. You hated me from the moment you married my father, and you made sure I knew it every single day." Constance's hand came up fast, moving toward Lydia's face in a slap that would have connected if Dominic hadn't caught her wrist. "Don't," he said quietly, his grip visibly tight enough to hurt. "Touch her again and I'll destroy you so completely that Caroline and Beatrice will be lucky to marry grocers." Constance jerked her hand back, cradling it against her chest. Her eyes were wild, desperate. "She's nothing," Constance hissed. "A nobody. You'll get bored of her and throw her away just like I did." "Maybe," Dominic agreed. "But that's my decision to make, not yours." He guided Lydia past Constance, out of the alcove, and back into the ballroom where hundreds of eyes tracked their movement. The music had started again, couples returning to the dance floor, but everyone was still watching them. "We should go," Dominic said quietly. "We've caused enough scandal for one night." They collected Lydia's cloak and made their way to the carriage. As they pulled away from the Ashford estate, Lydia looked back and saw Constance standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light, looking smaller than Lydia had ever seen her. The woman who'd controlled her entire life, reduced to a shadow. Lydia should have felt triumphant, should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt empty. "You're quiet," Dominic observed. "I'm processing." Lydia pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders. "You used me tonight, used my presence to make a point, to show Constance that you'd claimed what she'd thrown away." "Yes." "I'm a prop in your games." "Yes," Dominic said again. "But you're also the beneficiary. Your reputation is secure now. No one will question your position or your presence. Constance can't touch you. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" "I don't know what I wanted anymore." Lydia turned to look at him. "Is this what my life is now? Standing beside you while you destroy people who get in your way?" "Only if you choose it." Dominic met her eyes. "I told you before, you can leave any time. I'll give you references, money, everything you need to start over somewhere else. But if you stay, this is what it means. Being part of a world where power is the only currency that matters." The carriage rumbled through London's dark streets. Lydia thought about Constance's face, twisted with rage and fear, about Marcus's betrayal and Mansfield's humiliation, about the fact that she was wearing a dead woman's jewelry and living in borrowed rooms and playing at being someone she didn't recognize. "I want to stay," she heard herself say. "Why?" "Because, for the first time in my life, I'm not invisible. I'm not powerless. I'm terrified and out of my depth, but I'm also alive." Lydia took a shaky breath. "I don't know if that makes me brave or stupid." "Probably both," Dominic said. "Most worthwhile things require a bit of each." The carriage stopped in front of Thornfield House. Dominic helped her down, and they stood in the cool night air, the weight of the evening settling over them like snow. "Get some rest," Dominic said. "Tomorrow, things get complicated." "More complicated than tonight?" "Much more." His expression was unreadable. "Tonight was just the opening move. Now comes the real game." He disappeared into the house, leaving Lydia standing in the darkness, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She'd chosen this, chosen danger over safety, visibility over invisibility, power over peace. There was no going back now. Lydia walked inside, climbed the stairs to her room, and found an envelope waiting on her pillow. Her name was written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in harsh black ink. "You'll regret this." No signature, no explanation, just a threat delivered while she'd been out, while her room had been unguarded, while someone had walked into Thornfield House and left this message on her bed. Lydia's hands went numb. She dropped the paper, watching it flutter to the floor. Someone had been in her room. Someone wanted her to know she wasn't safe, even here. And whoever it was, they were still out there in the darkness, watching, waiting, planning their next move. Lydia didn't scream, didn't run. She stood frozen in the middle of her room, staring at the paper on the floor like it was a snake that might strike if she moved too quickly. Someone had been in here, in her space. While she'd been at the ball, someone had walked through Thornfield House, past servants, past locked doors, past all of Dominic's security, and left a threat on her pillow. The implications crashed over her in waves. This wasn't just social warfare anymore. This was personal, dangerous. She bent down slowly, picked up the paper with trembling fingers, and walked straight to Dominic's study. She didn't knock, just pushed open the door to find him at his desk, still in his evening clothes, writing something by lamplight. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face until he saw her expression. "What happened?" Lydia held out the paper without speaking. Dominic took it, read the 3 words, and his entire demeanor changed. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by something cold and focused. "Where was this?" "On my pillow, when I got back to my room." Lydia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Someone was in there, in Thornfield House, while we were gone." Dominic was already moving, striding past her into the hallway. "Mrs. Perry!" The housekeeper appeared within seconds, her face creased with concern. "Your Grace? Was anyone admitted to the house tonight while we were at the Ashford ball?" "No one, Your Grace. The doors were locked, and I personally checked every entrance before retiring to my quarters. Check them again, now, and wake every servant. I want to know if anyone saw or heard anything unusual." Dominic's voice was clipped, controlled fury barely leashed. "Search every room. Look for signs of entry, disturbed locks, anything out of place." Mrs. Perry's eyes widened. "Your Grace, what's happened?" "Someone left a threatening message in Miss Ashcroft's room, which means either we have a security breach or someone on staff is working against us. Find out which." Mrs. Perry paled and hurried away, already calling for the other servants. Dominic turned back to Lydia. "You're staying in the guest wing tonight, the room next to mine. Pack whatever you need, quickly." "You think they'll come back?" "I think I'm not taking any chances." Dominic examined the paper again, holding it up to the light. "This is expensive stationery, not the kind of thing a common thief would use. Whoever wrote this has money and access." "Constance," Lydia said immediately. "She was furious tonight. She threatened me." "Constance is too smart to do something this traceable. She'd hire someone, use intermediaries, cover her tracks." Dominic set the paper down carefully. "This feels more personal, more reckless." "Then who?" "I don't know yet, but I will find out." His eyes met hers, and Lydia saw something dangerous in them. "No one threatens people under my protection. Not in my own house." The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel oddly safe, which was probably more concerning than the threat itself. She went back to her room, Dominic insisted on accompanying her, and threw clothes into a bag while he stood guard at the door. The space felt violated now, contaminated by the knowledge that someone had stood exactly where she was standing, touching her things, leaving their poison. They moved her to the guest wing, to a room that was larger and more luxurious than her previous one. Dominic checked the windows, tested the lock on the door, and finally seemed satisfied. "Lock this behind me," he ordered. "Don't open it for anyone except me or Mrs. Perry. Understood?" Lydia nodded. "What are you going to do?" "Find out who did this. And make sure they regret it." He paused at the door. "Try to sleep. Tomorrow we're going to change tactics." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm tired of playing defense. It's time to go on the attack." He left, and Lydia locked the door behind him with shaking hands. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her burgundy dress and her borrowed jewelry, and tried to process everything that had happened. In less than 48 hours, she'd gone from being Constance's unwanted burden to being the center of London's biggest scandal. She'd danced with a duke, watched him destroy his enemies in public, and now someone was threatening her life. This wasn't the quiet, invisible existence she'd lived for 6 years. This was chaos and danger and constant uncertainty. And despite the fear churning in her stomach, despite the threat lying somewhere in the darkness outside her window, Lydia realized something startling. She didn't want to go back to being invisible. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by every sound in the unfamiliar room. When morning light finally crept through the windows, Lydia gave up entirely and dressed in another of the borrowed gowns. This one, a practical gray that felt more like armor than clothing. A knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Ashcroft? It's Mrs. Perry." Lydia opened the door to find the housekeeper looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "We searched the entire house," Mrs. Perry said without preamble. "Every entrance was secure, no signs of forced entry. But we found something in the servants' quarters." She held out a small leather purse. Lydia took it, felt the weight of coins inside. £20, Mrs. Perry said quietly. "Hidden in Sarah's room. Sarah's one of the housemaids. Been with us for 3 years, never caused any trouble. But £20 is more than she'd make in 6 months of wages." "You think she was paid to let someone in?" "I think someone offered her more money than she could refuse. We questioned her, and she broke down crying. Said a man approached her 2 days ago at the market. Offered her the money to leave the garden door unlocked last night and not mention it to anyone." Lydia's chest tightened. 2 days ago. Before the Ashford ball. Before the confrontation. Someone had been planning this, setting it up, waiting for the right moment. Did she describe the man? Young, well-dressed, charming, told her it was a harmless prank for a friend. Mrs. Perry's expression was grim. She swears she had no idea it was anything serious. His Grace has dismissed her without references. That seems harsh. She compromised the safety of everyone in this household for £20, Miss Ashcroft. His Grace showed remarkable restraint by not having her arrested. Mrs. Perry's voice softened slightly. The man she described sounds like Marcus Thornberry. Of course it did. Marcus, who'd already betrayed Dominic once for money, who'd been humiliated publicly at the Ashford ball, who probably wanted revenge and was stupid enough to think threatening Lydia would accomplish it. "Where's His Grace now?" "In his study. He asked me to bring you to him when you woke." Lydia followed Mrs. Perry through the morning quiet house to Dominic's study. He was standing by the window, still dressed in last night's clothes, looking like he hadn't slept at all. "Miss Ashcroft," he said without turning around, "we need to talk about your next move." "My next move?" "The threat changes things. Whoever sent it, and I'm fairly certain it was Marcus, is trying to intimidate you into leaving, which means we need to do the opposite." He turned to face her, and Lydia was struck by how tired he looked. "We need to make you so visible, so untouchable, that threatening you becomes impossible." "How do we do that?" "By making an announcement that will shock every person in London." Dominic's expression was unreadable. "By making you my fiancé." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lydia stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Your what?" "Fiancé. We'll announce our engagement publicly. Make it clear that you're under my protection, not just as an employee, but as my future wife." Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing business arrangements instead of marriage. "It solves multiple problems. Your reputation becomes unassailable. Anyone who threatens you threatens me directly, and it gives us a legitimate reason for you to be constantly at my side gathering information. You want to fake an engagement. I want to use every tool available to protect you and advance our goals. A fake engagement accomplishes both." Lydia's mind was racing. "People will never believe it. We barely know each other. Courtships in our circles last weeks, not years, will say I was captivated by your intelligence and discretion. You were drawn to my... whatever women find appealing about me. It's plausible enough. What about when we inevitably break it off? That'll destroy my reputation worse than anything Constance could do. Not if we do it carefully. A mutual parting, an amicable end. You'll still have my references, my support, and the social connections you've built, plus whatever settlement I provide, which will be generous." Dominic crossed his arms. This isn't a real proposal, Miss Ashcroft. It's a strategic move, one that benefits us both. Lydia walked to the window, looking out at the London morning. Carriages already rolling past, servants hurrying on errands, the city waking to another day of gossip and scandal. What if I say no? Then we find another solution. But it won't be as effective, and you'll remain vulnerable. Dominic's reflection appeared in the glass beside hers. I told you yesterday that you were becoming dangerous. This makes you lethal. Or it makes me a bigger target. It makes you an impossible target. Anyone who comes after the Duke of Thornfield's fiancée will face consequences they can't imagine. His voice dropped lower. I don't make this offer lightly, Miss Ashcroft. Fake or not, an engagement is a public commitment. It ties my reputation to yours. That's not something I do for just anyone. Lydia thought about the threat, about Constance's fury, about Marcus's betrayal and Mansfield's accusations, about the fact that she'd been thrown out of her home less than 2 days ago and was already caught in games she barely understood. She thought about being invisible, about standing against walls and watching life happen to other people. And then she thought about last night, about standing in a ballroom while Dominic destroyed his enemies, about the way people had looked at her with respect instead of pity, about being dangerous instead of powerless. If we do this, Lydia said slowly, I want real terms, written down, clear expectations, clear exit strategy, clear compensation. Agreed. And I want to be involved in decisions, not just standing beside you looking decorative, actually knowing what's happening and why. You already are involved. This just makes it official. And if someone questions the engagement, if they try to expose it as fake, then we convince them otherwise. Dominic's eyes met hers in the reflection. We sell the performance, Miss Ashcroft. Make it so believable that even we start to wonder if it's real. That was the dangerous part. Not the fake engagement itself, but the possibility of forgetting it was fake, of letting down guards that shouldn't come down, of mistaking strategic partnership for something more. All right, Lydia heard herself say. I'll do it. Dominic turned to face her directly. You're sure? No, but I haven't been sure of anything since you found me standing in the rain. I'm just choosing which uncertainty terrifies me less. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in years. He pulled a small box from his desk drawer. Then we should make it official. The ring inside was stunning. A sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in gold that gleamed in the morning light. It looked old, valuable, exactly the kind of thing a duke would give his intended bride. It was my grandmother's, Dominic said quietly. One of the few pieces of family jewelry I actually care about. If you're going to wear a fake engagement ring, it should at least be a good one. He took her hand, his fingers warm and steady, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. There, he said. Now you're officially the future Duchess of Thornfield. How does it feel? Surreal, Lydia admitted, staring at the ring, like I'm watching someone else's life. You'll get used to it. Now comes the hard part, convincing London that this is real. Dominic released her hand, all business again. We'll announce it today. I'll call on several key society figures. Let the information leak naturally. By tonight, everyone will know. Tomorrow we attend Lady Westbrook's garden party together as an engaged couple. Just like that? No time to prepare? The best performances are the ones that look spontaneous. Besides, we don't have time to waste. Marcus or whoever's behind that threat could try something else. Dominic's expression hardened. But once you're my acknowledged fiancé, any move against you becomes a declaration of war. Most people aren't stupid enough for that. Most people, but not all. The announcement spread through London like wildfire, exactly as Dominic had predicted. By noon, 3 different messengers had delivered notes from various society matrons requesting confirmation. By evening, a small crowd of curious onlookers had gathered outside Thornfield House, hoping for a glimpse of the mysterious woman who'd captured the Duke's interest. Lydia watched them from her window, feeling dizzy with the speed of it all. 48 hours ago, she'd been nobody. Now she was the future Duchess of Thornfield, wearing a sapphire ring worth more than most people's houses, preparing to attend a garden party where she'd be displayed like a prize acquisition. You're thinking too much. Lydia turned to find Dominic leaning in her doorway, dressed for dinner. I'm thinking exactly the right amount, she countered. This is insane. This is strategy. There's a difference. He entered the room, hands in his pockets. How are you handling it? I'm terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Is that normal? For anyone with sense, yes. Dominic studied her face. You can still back out. We haven't made the announcement publicly yet. Just let it leak through society channels. We could claim it was a misunderstanding. And let whoever threatened me think they won. No. Lydia lifted her chin. I'm committed. Just tell me what I need to do to sell this performance. First, stop calling it a performance when other people might hear. As far as anyone knows, this is completely genuine. Dominic pulled a chair over and sat facing her. Second, we need a story. How we fell in love, when I proposed, all the romantic details people will ask about. You want me to lie convincingly about our entire relationship? I want us to create a narrative that's plausible and consistent. It doesn't have to be elaborate, just believable. He leaned forward. So, when did I first notice you? Lydia thought about it. At Lord Morrison's dinner party, the one where you saw me solve the necklace mystery. Good. I was intrigued by your intelligence and observation skills. Started watching you at other events, impressed by your composure despite your stepmother's treatment. Dominic nodded. When did I approach you? The morning you found me in the rain. You'd been planning to offer me a position, but seeing Constance throw me out made you realize how strong I was, how much you'd underestimated me. And I was captivated. Dominic's voice took on a different quality, warmer, almost affectionate. By your dignity under pressure, your refusal to beg or break. I offered you employment, but I was already falling in love. The words sounded real, too real. Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. When did you propose? She asked. Last night, after the confrontation at the Ashford ball. Dominic's eyes held hers. I saw you stand up to your stepmother, saw you handle Marcus and Mansfield and all of it without flinching. I realized I didn't want you as just my secretary. I wanted you as my partner, my equal. That's actually quite romantic. It's strategic. Romance is just strategy applied to emotions. But something flickered in his expression that looked almost like uncertainty. We'll practice the story until it becomes second nature, until we can tell it without thinking. They spent the next hour rehearsing their fictional courtship, polishing details, making it seamless. By the time Mrs. Perry called them for dinner, Lydia could recite their love story like it had actually happened. The disturbing part was how easily the lies came, how natural it felt to describe falling in love with someone she barely knew. Lady Westbrook's garden party was exactly the kind of event Lydia had always hated. Hundreds of people milling about in careful social hierarchies, judging each other's clothes and connections while pretending to admire the flowers. But she wasn't arriving as Constance's unwanted stepdaughter anymore. She was arriving as Dominic's fiancée, wearing a pale green dress that made her look ethereal and expensive, with his grandmother's ring catching the afternoon sunlight. The crowd parted for them. Whispers followed their every step. That's her. Never seen him look at anyone like that. She must be extraordinary to catch his attention. Lady Westbrook herself rushed over, all false smiles and calculating eyes. Your Grace and Miss Ashcroft, or should I say, the future Duchess. How wonderful to see you both. You must tell me everything about this whirlwind romance. There's not much to tell, Dominic said smoothly, his hand settling at Lydia's waist in a gesture that looked possessive and protective. I saw something remarkable in Lydia that others had overlooked. I was fortunate enough to convince her to take a chance on me. It was perfectly delivered, modest but proud, romantic but not saccharine. Lady Westbrook practically melted. How lovely! And the ring! May I see? Lydia extended her hand, watching Lady Westbrook's eyes widen at the sapphire. The Thornfield family ring, the older woman breathed. Your Grace, you must be very serious indeed. Completely, Dominic said, and Lydia felt his fingers tighten slightly at her waist. A reminder, a warning. They were performing now, and the performance had to be flawless. They moved through the party like dancers executing complicated choreography, greeting people, accepting congratulations, telling their romantic story over and over until it felt like truth. Dominic played his part perfectly, attentive and affectionate without being excessive, his touches brief but meaningful. Lydia tried to match his performance, but she felt like an imposter. These people believed she was about to become a duchess. They treated her with respect and deference she'd never earned. And then she saw Constance. Her stepmother stood near the fountain with Caroline and Beatrice, all three of them dressed in expensive gowns that suddenly looked cheap compared to what Lydia was wearing. Constance's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "She's here," Lydia murmured to Dominic. "I know. Ignore her." But Constance wasn't planning to be ignored. She swept across the garden with her daughters in tow, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Lydia," she called out, her voice carrying across the nearby conversations. "What wonderful news! I had to come congratulate you personally." Several people turned to watch. This was the confrontation they'd been waiting for, the cast-off stepdaughter facing the woman who'd thrown her away. "Mrs. Ashcroft," Dominic said coldly, "how kind of you to offer your congratulations." "Oh, I'm delighted, truly." Constance's eyes glittered with malice. "Though I must admit, I'm surprised. Lydia was always so plain, so unremarkable. I never imagined she'd catch the eye of someone like you, Your Grace." "Then you severely underestimated her," Dominic said, "as did many people, fortunately for me." "Indeed." Constance turned to Lydia, lowering her voice just enough that only their small group could hear. "Tell me, dear, does His Grace know about your difficulties? Your tendency toward manipulation and deceit?" Lydia felt ice spread through her chest. This was it, the moment Constance would try to destroy everything with carefully placed lies. But before she could respond, Dominic laughed. Actually laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Mrs. Ashcroft, if you're referring to the stories you've been spreading about Lydia's supposed character flaws, I should inform you that I've had investigators looking into your claims." His smile turned cold. "Would you like me to share what they found? About your treatment of her over the past 6 years? About the inheritance you've been illegally withholding that her father left specifically for her?" Constance went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" Dominic's voice dropped dangerously low. "Edward Ashcroft's will included a trust fund for Lydia to be released on her 21st birthday or her marriage. You've been keeping that money for yourself, claiming it was absorbed into general estate management. That's theft, Mrs. Ashcroft, and I have documentation to prove it." The blood drained from Constance's face. Around them, people were openly staring now, shocked whispers spreading through the crowd. "You can't prove anything. I have the original will, witness statements from your late husband's solicitor, bank records showing where the money actually went, and to personal accounts for you and your daughters." Dominic's expression was merciless. "I was planning to bring it to the authorities quietly, but if you continue to spread lies about my fiancé, I'll make it as public as possible. Your choice." Constance looked between Dominic and Lydia, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Caroline and Beatrice stood frozen, probably realizing that their comfortable life was built on stolen money. "This isn't over," Constance hissed. "Yes," Lydia said quietly, finding her voice. "It is. You don't get to hurt me anymore, Constance. You don't get to control me or diminish me or make me feel worthless. That part of my life is finished." She turned her back on her stepmother, the same dismissal Dominic had used at the Ashford ball, and walked away. Dominic followed, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. Behind them, Lydia heard Constance's sharp intake of breath, the beginning of protest that died unspoken. When she glanced back, her stepmother was standing alone, abandoned by even Caroline and Beatrice, looking small and defeated. "Did you really have investigators looking into her?" Lydia asked quietly. "Of course. I investigate everyone connected to my interests. The trust fund information was easy to find once I knew where to look." Dominic guided her toward a quieter corner of the garden. "Your father left you £30,000, Miss Ashcroft. Constance has been living off it for 3 years while telling you there was nothing." £30,000. Enough to live comfortably for years. Enough to be completely independent. And Constance had stolen every penny. "Can we actually get it back?" "Already in process. My solicitors filed the paperwork yesterday. You should see the first payments within a month." Dominic's smile was grim. "Consider it a wedding gift. From me to my future wife." Lydia stared at him, overwhelmed. He'd not only protected her from Constance's lies, but actually recovered the inheritance she'd never known existed. In less than 3 days, he'd transformed her entire life. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "The engagement, the protection, going after Constance. It's more than you need to do for just an employee." "Is it?" Dominic's expression was unreadable. "You're useful to me, Miss Ashcroft. Valuable. I protect my investments." "I'm not an investment." "Aren't you?" His eyes held hers. "I'm investing time, money, and reputation in you. I expect returns, information, loyalty, partnership. That's what this is. A business arrangement that benefits us both." The word should have stung, should have reminded her that this was all fake, all strategy, all performance. But there was something in the way he said it that felt like deflection, like he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Before she could press further, a commotion near the garden entrance drew everyone's attention. A carriage had arrived, black lacquer with gold trim, expensive and official-looking. A man stepped out, tall and distinguished, with gray hair and an air of authority that made even Dominic straighten slightly. "That's Lord Chancellor Pemberton," someone whispered nearby. "What's he doing here?" Lord Chancellor, the same Pemberton who'd been plotting against Dominic's business interests, the man whose nephew, Marcus, had betrayed family secrets for money. He walked directly toward Dominic and Lydia, his expression grave. "Your Grace," Pemberton said formally, "might I have a word, in private?" "Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of my fiancé," Dominic replied coolly. Pemberton's gaze moved to Lydia, assessing and sharp. Then he sighed. "Very well, I've come to apologize." The words seemed to cost him physical effort. "My nephew Marcus came to me this morning, confessed to everything, the stolen documents, the arrangement with Mansfield, even the threat he left for Miss Ashcroft." Lydia's blood ran cold. "He admitted it." "He did. Apparently his conscience got the better of him." Pemberton's expression was bitter. "Or more likely, he realized the consequences if he was caught. Regardless, I wanted you to know that he's been dealt with, disinherited, cut off from the family completely. And I've personally ensured that Mansfield's accusations will go nowhere." "Why?" Dominic asked bluntly. "Why help us after trying to undermine me?"
Because
Marcus's actions crossed a line. Business rivalry is one thing. Threatening innocent women is another. Pemberton met Dominic's eyes. "I may not like your methods, Your Grace, but I respect the rules of engagement. My nephew violated those rules. He doesn't represent the family anymore." The apology hung in the air between them. Dominic studied Pemberton for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I accept your apology, Lord Chancellor, and I appreciate you addressing the situation directly." "Don't mistake this for friendship," Pemberton warned. "We're still on opposite sides of several political issues, but we'll fight those battles properly, without threats or intimidation." "Agreed." Pemberton turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Your Grace. About those shipping contracts you secured, I had them reviewed by independent auditors. Everything checks out. You were right, and I was wrong to question them publicly. I'll be issuing a statement to that effect." He left before Dominic could respond, leaving them standing in stunned silence. "Did that actually just happen?" Lydia asked. "Pemberton just admitted fault and cleared my name in front of half of London's elite." Dominic sounded almost as shocked as she felt. "That never happens in our world." Maybe Marcus's confession made him realize how far things had gone. Or maybe seeing you stand up to Constance showed him what real courage looks like. Dominic's hand found hers again, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Either way, this changes everything. Pemberton's statement will carry weight. It'll shut down the accusations, restore my business reputation, and make you even more untouchable." Around them people were whispering again, but the tone had shifted. Now they were talking about Pemberton's apology, about Dominic's vindication, about how the Duke of Thornfield and his remarkable fiancée had weathered every attack and emerged stronger. Lydia felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just playing a role anymore, wasn't just pretending to be powerful. She was actually becoming it. The rest of the garden party passed in a blur of congratulations and curious questions. By the time they left, Lydia's face hurt from smiling, and her mind was spinning with names and faces and political alliances she'd need to remember. In the carriage ride home, she finally let herself relax, sinking back against the velvet seat with a sigh. "You did well today," Dominic said quietly. "Very well. You're a natural at this. At lying convincingly? That's not exactly a skill to be proud of. At understanding power dynamics and adapting accordingly? That's exactly the skill that matters in our world." He pulled a document from his jacket. "Speaking of which, the terms of our arrangement, as promised. Everything in writing." Lydia took the document, scanning the neat handwriting. It was all there: the duration of the fake engagement, the compensation she'd receive, the exit strategy, the support he'd provide afterward. Fair, generous, completely bloodless. "It looks like a business contract," she said, "because that's what it is." Dominic's expression was carefully neutral. "Romance is for fools, Miss Ashcroft. We're too smart for that." Lydia signed her name at the bottom, and Dominic countersigned. They were now officially, legally bound in a fake engagement that would fool all of London. The question was whether they could keep fooling themselves that it was purely strategic, that the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was the most interesting puzzle he'd ever encountered, meant nothing, that the warmth spreading through her chest when he smiled had nothing to do with actual affection. They arrived back at Thornfield House to find a messenger waiting with a letter. Dominic read it, and his expression shifted. "What is it?" Lydia asked. "An invitation to the Queen's summer ball next month." He looked up, something like triumph in his eyes. "Only the most elite members of society are invited. This is the highest level of social acceptance possible. They're acknowledging us. Officially. They're acknowledging you," Dominic corrected. "The future Duchess of Thornfield, invited to meet royalty. This is your victory, Miss Ashcroft. You've gone from outcast to honored guest in less than a week." Lydia took the invitation, reading the elegant script. Her name right there next to Dominic's, summoning them to the most exclusive event of the season. She'd won. Against Constance, against Mansfield, against every person who'd dismissed her as worthless. She'd become exactly what she'd set out to be: dangerous, powerful, impossible to ignore. So why did she feel like she'd traded one kind of trap for another? The question haunted Lydia through the following weeks as London's social season reached its fever pitch. She and Dominic attended 3 events a week, sometimes 4, always performing their engagement with flawless precision. They danced together, sat close at dinners, exchanged glances that looked tender but felt calculated. The city ate it up. The scandal of her stepmother's theft had only made their romance more compelling. The cast-off daughter rescued by a noble duke, true love triumphing over cruelty. It was the kind of story people wanted to believe in. The problem was that Lydia was starting to believe it herself. She noticed things she shouldn't notice. The way Dominic's jaw tightened when other men looked at her too long. How his hand always found the small of her back in crowds, protective without being possessive. The rare moments when his carefully controlled mask slipped and she caught glimpses of something warmer underneath. She told herself it meant nothing. He was just a good actor. They both were. But late at night, lying in bed with his grandmother's ring catching moonlight, she wondered if they were performing so well that the lines between real and fake had started to blur. 3 weeks after the garden party, Mrs. Perry knocked on her door with news that made Lydia's stomach drop. "Your stepmother is downstairs," the housekeeper said, her expression disapproving. "She's requesting to speak with you. His Grace is out on business, but I can send her away if you'd prefer." Lydia's first instinct was to refuse, to hide behind Dominic's protection and avoid Constance entirely. But she was tired of hiding. "No," she said, standing straighter. "I'll see her. In the drawing room." Mrs. Perry looked concerned. "Are you certain, miss? After everything she's done?" "I'm certain." Constance waited in the drawing room, looking smaller than Lydia remembered. Her expensive dress couldn't hide how much weight she'd lost, how deep the lines around her mouth had become. She stood when Lydia entered, hands clasped tightly together. "Lydia," she said, and her voice cracked on the name. "Mrs. Ashcroft." Lydia kept her tone neutral, formal. "What do you want?" "I came to—" Constance stopped, swallowed hard. "I came to apologize." The words hung between them like something fragile and unexpected. Lydia stared at her stepmother, waiting for the trap, the hidden knife. "Apologize," she repeated flatly. "Yes, Constance's hands twisted together. For everything. For how I treated you. For stealing your inheritance. For trying to destroy you even after I'd thrown you out. For all of it. Why now? Lydia's voice was cold. Because Dominic exposed your theft? Because your reputation is in ruins and Caroline and Beatrice can barely show their faces in society anymore? Because I was wrong. Constance's eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. About you. About everything. I spent 6 years trying to break you because I was jealous. Jealous? The word came out sharp with disbelief. Of what? Of how much your father loved you. Of the way he looked at you like you were his entire world while he barely tolerated me. Constance's voice dropped to a whisper. I was his second wife, his consolation prize after your mother died. I knew it, he knew it, everyone knew it, and every time I saw you I was reminded that I'd never be what she was to him. Lydia felt something crack inside her chest. She'd spent years wondering what she'd done to earn Constance's hatred, assuming it was some fundamental flaw in herself, but it had never been about her at all. That doesn't excuse what you did, Lydia said quietly. No, it doesn't. Constance met her eyes. I destroyed my own life trying to destroy yours. The inheritance theft will likely result in criminal charges. Caroline and Beatrice won't speak to me. They blame me for ruining their prospects. The house is being sold to pay debts. I have nothing left. Good. The word came out before Lydia could stop it. Constance flinched like she'd been slapped. I deserve that, she said. I deserve all of it. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. That you were never the problem, Lydia. I was. And I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends, even though I know it's too late. She turned to leave, her shoulders hunched with defeat. Lydia watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and hollowness. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Constance broken and apologetic, admitting that Lydia had been right all along. So why didn't it feel like victory? Wait, Lydia heard herself say. Constance stopped, not turning around. The criminal charges, Lydia continued slowly. If I testified that it was a misunderstanding, that you had my permission to manage the funds, would that help? Constance's back went rigid. Why would you do that? Because watching you destroy yourself won't change the past. And because, Lydia took a breath, because my father wouldn't have wanted this. He loved you, even if it wasn't the way you needed to be loved. He wouldn't want you in prison. You're offering me mercy. Constance's voice shook. After everything. I'm offering you a chance to disappear quietly instead of publicly. Take it or don't. I honestly don't care what you choose. But if you take it, I never want to see you again. Ever. Constance finally turned, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. She left quickly before Lydia could change her mind. The drawing room felt too quiet in her absence, like the eye of a storm that had finally passed. Lydia sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. She'd won. Constance was destroyed, apologetic, broken. Her inheritance was being recovered. Her reputation was secure. Everything she'd fought for was hers. So why did she feel so empty? The answer came a week later at the Queen's summer ball. Lydia had spent days preparing for the event, choosing the perfect dress, learning the proper protocols, rehearsing conversations until they felt natural. This was the culmination of everything, the moment when she'd be accepted by the highest levels of society, formally acknowledged as the Duke of Thornfield's future wife. The ballroom at Buckingham Palace was more magnificent than anything Lydia had imagined. Crystal chandeliers the size of carriages hung from painted ceilings. Hundreds of candles reflected off mirrors and polished marble. The elite of London and beyond filled the space, all of them dressed in their finest, all of them watching as Lydia and Dominic were announced. The Duke of Thornfield and his fiancée, Miss Lydia Ashcroft. Every head turned. Conversations paused. In that moment, Lydia felt the full weight of how far she'd come. From unwanted stepdaughter to honored guest at the Queen's ball, standing beside one of the most powerful men in England. They made their way through the crowd, greeting dignitaries and nobles, playing their roles perfectly. Dominic's hand never left her waist, guiding her through the complex social choreography with practiced ease. And then they were announced to the Queen herself. Queen Victoria sat on a raised dais, smaller than Lydia had expected, but radiating authority that made up for her stature. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing as Lydia and Dominic approached. They bowed and curtsied deeply. "Your Grace," the Queen said to Dominic, "how pleasant to see you, and this must be the remarkable young woman we've heard so much about." "Your Majesty," Lydia managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's an honor. We understand you've had quite a journey, Miss Ashcroft, from difficult circumstances to this moment." The Queen's gaze was penetrating. "Tell us, do you believe you're ready for the responsibilities that come with being a Duchess?" The question was a test. Everyone in earshot knew it. This was the moment when Lydia either proved herself worthy or revealed herself as an imposter. "I believe I'm learning, Your Majesty," Lydia said carefully. "The Duke has been generous in teaching me what I need to know. But I also believe that worthiness comes from actions, not titles. I hope to prove myself through service, not just position." The Queen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been approval. "A diplomatic answer. We appreciate honesty tempered with wisdom." She turned to Dominic. "You've chosen well, Your Grace. We look forward to welcoming Miss Ashcroft into our court officially." It was a blessing. Royal approval, given publicly, that would silence any remaining doubters about Lydia's suitability. They retreated from the dais, and Lydia felt Dominic's hand tighten at her waist. "Well done," he murmured. "You just secured your position permanently. No one will question you now. Is that what we wanted?" The question slipped out before Lydia could stop it. Dominic looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." Lydia glanced around at the glittering crowd, at the wealth and power and carefully constructed hierarchies. "We achieved everything we set out to achieve. Your reputation is restored, my position is secure, our enemies are defeated. So what happens now?" "Now we maintain it, continue working together, gathering information, building influence." "For how long?" Lydia's voice dropped lower. "Until the 6 months in our contract are up? Until one of us decides this arrangement is no longer beneficial?" Dominic's expression went carefully blank. "What are you asking, Miss Ashcroft?" "I'm asking if any of this is real." The words tumbled out, dangerous and honest. "If there's anything between us beyond strategic partnership, or if I'm just fooling myself into believing that when you look at me, it means something more than calculation." The silence between them stretched thin and fragile. Around them, music played and people danced and London's elite celebrated, oblivious to the conversation that felt like standing on a cliff's edge. "We should dance," Dominic said finally, his voice neutral. "People are watching." "Of course they are. They're always watching." Lydia let him lead her onto the dance floor, his hand settling at her waist in the familiar position they'd practiced dozens of times. "That's the problem, isn't it? We've been performing so long that I don't know what's real anymore." "Does it matter?" Dominic's eyes searched her face. "Real or performed? The outcome is the same. You're protected, successful, powerful. That's what you wanted." "Is it?" Lydia's throat tightened. "Because I'm starting to think what I wanted was to matter to someone, to be seen as more than useful or valuable or strategically important, to be actually important." "You are important. As a tool, as an asset, as your fake fiancé who helps you navigate society." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes and hated herself for it. "But the moment this arrangement stops serving your purposes, I'm replaceable, just like I was replaceable to Constance." Dominic's grip on her hand tightened almost painfully. "That's not the same thing at all." "Isn't it? She used me for 6 years and threw me away when I stopped being useful. You've been honest about using me from the beginning, which I appreciate. But the outcome is the same. I'm still just a means to an end." The music swelled around them. Dominic guided her through a turn, his expression more unguarded than she'd ever seen it. "You're not replaceable," he said quietly. "You're not a tool or an asset or any of the clinical terms I've used to keep this professional. You're..." He stopped, jaw working like the words were physically difficult to produce. "I'm what?" Lydia pressed, her heart hammering. "You're the first person in years who's seen past my position and power to what's underneath, who's challenged me and matched me, and made me question whether strategic thinking is always the right approach." Dominic's eyes held hers. "You're not a means to an end, Lydia. You've become the end itself, and that terrifies me." Lydia's breath caught. "Why?" "Because people I care about become liabilities, targets, weaknesses my enemies can exploit." His voice was rough. "I've spent 15 years building walls to prevent that. And you walked through every single one like they were made of paper. So what do we do about it? I don't know. Dominic pulled her slightly closer, breaking about 6 different rules of proper dancing etiquette. I've never been in this situation before. I don't have a strategy. Maybe we don't need one. Lydia's free hand found his shoulder, steadying herself. Maybe we just see what happens. Stop performing and start actually living. That's a terrible plan. No structure, no guaranteed outcome, no way to predict complications. It's also terrifying and uncertain and completely unlike anything we've done so far. Lydia smiled, despite the tears threatening to spill. Sound familiar? Dominic stared at her for a long moment. Then, in front of the Queen and half of London's elite, he did something completely unprecedented. He laughed, really laughed, the sound warm and genuine and nothing like his usual calculated responses. You're right, he said. It's a terrible plan. Let's do it anyway. He kissed her. Right there on the dance floor, in full view of everyone, breaking every rule of propriety and protocol. And Lydia kissed him back, not caring about the gasps and whispers erupting around them. Not caring that this would be the scandal everyone talked about for months. For once in her life, she wasn't thinking about strategy or consequences or what people would say. She was just living. When they finally pulled apart, the ballroom had gone completely silent. Lydia looked around at the shocked faces, at the Queen's raised eyebrows, at the hundreds of witnesses to their very public display. We should probably leave, Dominic murmured, not sounding particularly concerned about it. Probably, Lydia agreed. They walked out together, hand in hand, leaving the whispers and speculation behind. Outside, the London night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. We just destroyed our carefully constructed image, Lydia said, starting to feel the reality of what they'd done. Everyone will think we're reckless and inappropriate. Everyone will think we're genuinely in love, Dominic corrected, which we apparently are, despite my best efforts to prevent it. Are we? Lydia looked up at him. Really? I kissed you in front of the Queen, Lydia. I don't do reckless things unless they matter. He pulled her closer. You matter. More than strategy, more than reputation, more than any of the things I've spent years prioritizing. What about the contract, the 6-month timeline, the exit strategy? We'll tear it up, make a new one. Dominic's smile was crooked, uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. One that doesn't have an end date, if you want that. Lydia thought about everything she'd been through. The morning Constance had thrown her out, Dominic finding her in the rain, the balls and scandals and strategic moves, the slow realization that somewhere between performance and reality, she'd fallen in love with a man who claimed not to believe in romance. I want that, she said, but I want it real this time. No contracts, no strategies, no performing, just us figuring out what we are without all the complicated planning. That sounds risky and uncontrolled and nothing like how I operate. I know, Lydia grinned. Perfect, isn't it? Dominic kissed her again, slower this time, without an audience. When he pulled back, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. I'm going to be terrible at this, he warned. I'll probably still try to strategize our relationship and plan conversations and analyze everything to death. And I'll probably panic and doubt myself and wonder if I'm good enough for any of this. Lydia took his hand. We'll figure it out together. No guarantees, no perfectly controlled outcomes. Just 2 people who are trying. 2 people who are trying, Dominic repeated, like he was testing how the words felt. That's the worst plan I've ever agreed to. Good thing you have me to keep you from being too sensible. They walked back to the waiting carriage together, and Lydia caught her reflection in the window. She looked different than she had that morning in the rain. Not just the expensive dress and elaborate hair, but something deeper. A confidence that came from knowing she'd survived everything thrown at her and come out stronger. The next morning, Lydia woke to sunlight streaming through her window and Mrs. Perry knocking at her door with an enormous stack of calling cards. Every society matron in London wants to call on you, the housekeeper said, her expression caught between amusement and exasperation. The incident at the Queen's ball has made you the most talked-about woman in the city. The incident, Lydia repeated, smiling at the euphemism. Is that what we're calling it? Among other things, Mrs. Perry set down the cards. His Grace is asking for you in his study when you're ready. Lydia dressed quickly and found Dominic at his desk, surrounded by newspapers. He looked up when she entered, and his expression was wry. "We made the front page of every major paper," he said, holding one up. "Society Duke abandons protocol for love. They're calling it the romance of the decade." "Are we letting them?" Lydia asked, settling into the chair across from him. "I thought we might." Dominic set down the paper. "With some modifications. I spoke with my solicitors this morning. The fake engagement contract has been destroyed. In its place, I'd like to propose something real." He pulled a small box from his desk drawer. Not his grandmother's ring. That was still on Lydia's finger. A different ring, simpler but somehow more meaningful. "This was my mother's wedding band," he said quietly. "Nothing elaborate, just gold and her initials engraved inside." "I'm not asking you to be my fake fiancé anymore, Lydia. I'm asking if you'll actually marry me. No strategy, no exit clause, no performance. Just us." Lydia's throat tightened. "You're sure?" "I'm terrified. But yes, I'm sure." Dominic's smile was uncertain, hopeful. "You've destroyed every carefully constructed plan I've made. You might as well destroy my bachelor status too. That's possibly the least romantic proposal in history. I'm working on it. Give me time." Lydia laughed and took the ring, sliding it onto her other hand beside the sapphire. "Yes, obviously yes, but I have conditions." "Of course you do. When we get married, I want to use some of my recovered inheritance to start a foundation. For women in situations like I was in, women with nowhere to go, no resources, no options." Lydia leaned forward. "I want to give them what you gave me, a chance, a real one." Dominic's expression softened. "That's perfect. We'll do it together. And I want us to be honest with each other. Really honest, not just strategically honest. If something bothers you or scares you or makes you question this, I need you to tell me." "Same for you." Dominic reached across the desk, taking her hand. "No more hiding behind walls or performances. We face things together." "Together," Lydia agreed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Perry entered, looking concerned. "Your Grace, there's a young woman at the door. She says she needs to speak with Miss Ashcroft urgently. Her name is Caroline Ashcroft." Lydia's stomach dropped. "Caroline? My stepsister? Shall I send her away?" "No." Lydia stood, curious despite herself. "I'll see her. In the drawing room." Caroline waited nervously, twisting her hands together in a gesture that reminded Lydia painfully of Constance. But when she looked up, her eyes were different, clearer, less calculating. "Lydia," she said quietly, "thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Caroline?" "To apologize and to ask for help." Caroline's voice cracked slightly. "Mother's facing criminal charges. Beatrice and I have been cut off socially. We can't find decent positions, and we're running out of money. I know we don't deserve your help after everything we did, but you're desperate," Lydia finished, "like I was when Dominic found me." "Yes." Caroline met her eyes. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm willing to work, to do whatever it takes. But I need a chance, the same one you got." Lydia studied her stepsister, remembering all the times Caroline had laughed at her humiliation, all the cruelties delivered with a smile. Part of her wanted to refuse, to let Caroline experience the same helplessness she'd felt. But she'd meant what she said about the foundation, about giving chances to women who needed them. "I'm starting a charitable organization," Lydia said slowly, "for women who need support finding employment and housing. If you're serious about working, you can help me build it. But I need real commitment, Caroline. Not just desperation that'll disappear the moment your circumstances improve." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "I'm serious. I promise. I'll do whatever you need. Then we'll try, on a probationary basis." Lydia's voice hardened slightly. "But if you betray my trust or treat the women we're helping with anything less than respect, you're out. Understood?" "Understood. Thank you, Lydia. Truly." Caroline left, and Lydia found Dominic waiting in the hallway, having clearly listened to the entire conversation. "You're giving your stepsister a job," he said, not quite making it a question. "I'm giving her a chance to prove she's changed. There's a difference." Lydia leaned against the wall, suddenly tired. "Is that too forgiving? Too naive?" "It's exactly right." Dominic pulled her close. "You're building something better than just revenge or vindication. You're creating actual change. That's far more powerful." Over the following months, Lydia threw herself into building the foundation. With Dominic's financial backing and strategic advice, which he tried very hard to limit with mixed success, they created an organization that provided housing, employment training, and support for women escaping difficult circumstances. Caroline proved herself surprisingly capable, working long hours and treating the women they helped with genuine compassion. Lydia watched her stepsister transform from entitled society girl to someone who actually understood struggle and grudgingly started to forgive her. Beatrice eventually joined as well, quieter than Caroline but equally committed. Even Constance, from her reduced circumstances in the country, sent what little money she could spare to support their work. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was change. The wedding took place in late autumn, smaller than what London society expected, but perfect for what Lydia and Dominic wanted. Close friends, genuine celebration, no performance required. Lydia wore a dress she'd chosen herself. Ivory silk with delicate embroidery. Elegant, but not ostentatious. Dominic wore the same expression he'd had the morning he found her in the rain. Intense focus, like she was the most important puzzle he'd ever encountered. "Ready?" he asked as they stood at the church entrance. "Terrified," Lydia admitted, "but yes." "Good. I'd be worried if you weren't." He took her hand. "Let's go build our impossible life together." They walked down the aisle as equals, no performing required. And when they exchanged vows, Lydia felt the weight of everything that had brought them to this moment. The pain, the strategy, the gradual realization that sometimes the best plans are the ones you don't make. At the reception afterward, Mrs. Perry approached with a small package. "This arrived for you, Your Grace," she said to Lydia, who was still getting used to the title. "From your father's former solicitor." Inside was a letter, yellow with age, sealed with her father's wax stamp. Lydia opened it with shaking hands. "My dearest Lydia, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've found your way despite the difficult circumstances I've left you in. I knew marrying Constance was a risk for you, but I was selfish. I couldn't bear being alone. I've set aside money for you in trust, though I suspect Constance will try to keep it. Fight for it, Lydia. Fight for everything you deserve. You're stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and capable of more than I ever showed you. Don't let anyone make you small. Don't let anyone convince you that quiet means powerless. Your mother was the strongest person I knew, and you have her fire in you. Be magnificent, my clever girl, and be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you." Your loving father, Lydia, read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Dominic appeared at her shoulder, reading over her arm. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew Constance would be difficult, and he still believed I could handle it." He was right. Dominic's arm came around her shoulders. "You did more than handle it. You transformed it into something extraordinary." Lydia folded the letter carefully, tucking it against her heart. Her father's last words, confirmation that she'd been loved and believed in, even when she'd felt most alone. Years later, standing in the Foundation's new building, 3 stories of support services and housing, funded by her recovered inheritance and Dominic's business investments, Lydia thought about that morning in the rain, about standing on the steps of Ashcroft House with nothing but a small bag and broken pride, choosing to walk forward instead of begging to stay. She'd thought she was choosing survival. She hadn't realized she was choosing transformation. The Foundation helped hundreds of women each year now. Caroline ran the employment program, Beatrice managed housing placements, and Lydia oversaw everything while also navigating her role as Duchess. It was messy and complicated, and nothing went according to plan. It was perfect. "You're thinking too much again," Dominic said, appearing beside her in the Foundation's office. "I can see it on your face. Just remembering." Lydia gestured at the building around them. "All of this started because I refused to beg, because I chose dignity over safety, and because I recognized strength when I saw it." Dominic pulled her close. "Best investment I ever made." "I'm not an investment anymore." "No. You're my wife, my partner, and the person who constantly reminds me that the best outcomes are the ones you can't control." He kissed her forehead. "Also the person who reorganized my entire filing system and refuses to admit it makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense. You're just too rigid to adapt." "See, constantly challenging me. It's exhausting." "And you love it." "Unfortunately, yes." Dominic's expression softened. "I love you." even though you've destroyed every carefully constructed plan I've ever made. Especially because of that, Lydia corrected. They stood together in the building they'd created, surrounded by the evidence of second chances and hard-fought victories. Lydia thought about Constance, who'd died the previous year, quietly, in the country, with Caroline and Beatrice at her bedside. She'd sent Lydia a final letter, one last apology that felt genuine instead of strategic. Lydia had forgiven her, not because Constance deserved it, but because holding on to hatred was exhausting and ultimately pointless. She thought about Marcus, who'd disappeared to America and occasionally sent letters asking forgiveness. Dominic wasn't ready to give. About Mansfield, whose business had collapsed and who now lived in reduced circumstances. About all the people who'd tried to destroy her and ended up destroying themselves instead. But mostly, she thought about the woman she'd become, not the invisible girl standing against walls, not the desperate outcast standing in the rain. Someone powerful, someone who used that power to build instead of destroy. Someone who'd learned that dignity, protected at all costs, really could rebuild everything else. "Come on," Dominic said, pulling her toward the door. "We have a dinner with Parliament members tonight. You promised to help me navigate the politics without insulting anyone." "I promised to try. There's a difference." "Good enough." They walked out together into the London evening, hand in hand, equals in every way that mattered. Behind them, the foundation's lights glowed warm against the darkening sky, a beacon for women who needed it, proof that second chances were possible, proof that when you refused to be broken, when you chose dignity over submission, when you built instead of destroyed, everything was possible, even the impossible. Especially the impossible. And in the end, that was the only plan worth following.